Go ahead and call the work session portion of this meeting to order.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move to amend the agenda to introduce a motion that's relative to our superintendent search process.
I accept the motion. If you'd like to make that. Is there a second to accept the motion? Second. Okay. Any further discussion? Do you want to read it first?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read the resolution now. Well, actually, this is on the amending the agenda.
Oh, okay. Oh, is there a discussion to amend the agenda? The motion to amend the agenda?
I move to amend the agenda.
No, sorry.
Oh,
We're just
already did
discussing.
discussion.
Okay. Ms. Tanner, can you call the roll?
Yes.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Jordan.
Aye.
Hayward.
Aye.
All right, Madam Chair, I'd like to introduce resolution notifying the public of the school board's intent to hold a series of closed meetings solely for the purpose of interviewing candidates for the position of superintendent. Whereas it is the intention of the school board of the city of Norfolk to hold a series of meetings for the sole purpose of interviewing candidates for the position of superintendent, and whereas section 2.2-372 Section 2.2-3712B of the Code of Virginia, 1950, as amended, authorizes a school board to hold such closed meetings pursuant to public notice, stating that they will be held some point within 15 days thereafter. Now therefore be it resolved by the school board of the city of Norfolk. Section 1, the school board hereby notifies the public that it will hold a series of closed meetings within 15 days after the date of the passage of this resolution for the sole purpose of interviewing candidates for the position of superintendent of Norfolk Public Schools. Section 2, that this resolution shall be in effect from and after the date of adoption. Madam Chair, do I hear a second?
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Tanner, please call the roll.
Basine.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.
Jordan.
Aye.
Hayward.
Aye. Okay. Okay. Now getting into what we have before us for our work session. The first hour I would like for us to spend on the budget as it pertains to the budget priorities that we've been in discussion with, so that we can give further detailed direction for our acting superintendent, Dr. Birdsong. And then the second half of the hour is going to allow us to discuss the board's specific budget, so that we can, again, provide direction to the superintendent. We've already been given a timeline for when Dr. Birdsong needs to have the information, and I would just like to say that I know that in the review of the topics that we discussed at our last meeting, everybody was able to share what their budget priorities were, and I appreciate that. And then we sent those priorities electronically to Ms. Tanner, who then put together a chart trying to kind of find the ones that were common between all of the board members. So what I'd like to do is pass this chart out to everyone. I'm going to divide it in half. Make sure we have enough here. Now, we did a chart similar to this back in 2015, where what we did was we had budget items listed, and every board member then ranked what those budget items were, and we kind of came to a consensus as to what the top budget items would be that we would have the superintendent focus attention on. That being said, we understand that Dr. Birdsong has her hand on the pulse of what the needs of the division are. We also understand that should items come up as she is reviewing benchmark assessments, facility needs, and other items, that things might come up that need to be brought to our attention and that need to take higher priority. But what she needs from us is just a general sense of the direction for planning. And Dr. Birdsong, if I'm not stating that correctly, let me know.
You are.
Okay. So it's very important that she receive that direction from us today. So again, what Ms. Tanner has done is she has taken all of the feedback that we have provided to her, and she's compiled it on this list. And what we're going to do is rank these items in priority. And I know that it says 1 is highest priority and 5 is lowest priority. don't take when it says lowest priority as it's not a priority, it's just with how we're ranking it. Okay? So, yes, I know there's questions, so, Ms. Basine, question?
Well, there are a couple of items on here that are already in progress. So what is the question around it? For instance, the special education and gifted education audit and the early start times, or
So-
I'll just say start times.
So what that says is, as she's preparing the budget, if there are budget items that come out of special education or gifted audits, do you want her to focus attention
in
on
that way.
prioritizing that in the budget?
Okay.
For the early start times, we know that we have 4 million
Right,
plus
okay.
in lighting.
Just wanted to be clear what
Yep.
the ask was
Mhm.
about that, okay.
Ms. Martin?
So are you asking us to only rank 5 things, so we can only have one highest
Mm.
priority?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Ms. Smith?
So how was the consolidation determined? Because I'm not seeing some of my submissions, I don't see where they fit in with the list that we have. And, yeah, so let's answer that question.
Sure. So,
agree.
Ms. Tanner, does
And that should have
everybody?
been, I think that should have been a discussion
Yeah.
amongst us, not a unilateral, as it seems, decision to how to consolidate and what to leave out and what to include.
Well, for the sake of time, and for the sake of meeting, and for the sake of the fact that Dr. Birdsong needs to have information given to her, we took everybody's information in, and Ms. Tanner kind of compiled areas that were, you know, if Ms. Martin said something, and if I said something, and Mr. Jordan said something, it got 3 points of commonality, and that's how it made it to the list.
Okay, well, I don't see
But-
mine in here anywhere.
Yeah.
So hold on a second. Ms. Tanner, do you have everyone's statements?
Yes, what
Okay.
I've done is, as you requested, to go through like goal 1, see who had commonalities and list those. Goal 2, same thing. Goal 3, same thing. And I do have a color code that I can
Okay.
give you guys and show you. I have the young lady helping me make copies real quick, but the 3 of you, I can make copies for you because they have hard copy packets. So I can give you all the color codes. You kind of see what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna let you.
Oh, the color. Okay. If I may, while she's doing that, I think what Ms. Smith is saying is important because there may be, I had several items on there that may, once I explain why I brought it forward as a priority, may either incite additional questions from my colleagues, or we may agree that, that should be a priority. So I think that is the value in seeing what all of the priorities are that we provide, and then paring it down, if that's
Well,
what the board.
again, for the sake of time and for giving consensus to Dr. Birdsong, that's why we are just trying to be as efficient as possible. And if something does come up later on that we have, the will of the board, then we can address it. But we'll make sure that everybody has the copies of what everybody has shared so that we can at least see them. Ms. Campson?
Well,
One doesn't have a copy of this. So I don't know.
no, they do. I have her making some copies just now. I didn't know that was
Oh,
gonna
but
be
why-
asked.
I guess,
Yeah, but this
No.
should have been on board docs as well, though.
yeah.
You know what?
For all of us in the transparency, as we like to say, it's nothing wrong with ultimately where we're at. It's how we keep getting to where we want to go. But this type of information should have been uploaded on board docs for all of us to be able to see, so that when we come here and sit down and we see this list, we all know what we're looking at.
I
And I don't think
understand.
what I'm asking or what I'm advocating is being adversarial, difficult, or anything like that. I think it's in best practices for the board as a whole.
I don't disagree, but with the time factor with what we were
Time
working
has
with.
nothing to
Time
do
doesn't
with
have
it.
anything to do with it.
It's not about time. It's about doing the right thing in the best interest of every individual on this board. There are 7 of us.
I understand that.
So in
I-
all,
I-
and I hear everything that's been stated here. Dr. Birdsong, Madam Chair, if I can, what's the deadline you need this by?
Well, when we had a discussion at the last meeting, I believe the board reported out to me that by the 18th, that this information would be provided in terms of what the board's priorities are. So that's what we discussed
On the
at
18th,
last
so that's our
meeting.
next board meeting, right? The 18th, I think is a Wednesday. And in all fairness to Dr. Gabriel, I think we're trying to do, she was trying to get it all done in here so you could get ahead of time. But I do understand, Ms. Smith, what you're saying. And it's good for all of us to be able to see the information. Now, and being able to rank it in priorities of what we need. Maybe what we can possibly do, we have this here. We also have, I know Ms. Tanner's getting the information out, but maybe what we can do is get all those information, all those items into some type of form that's online, that everybody can see it, let them go back down there, and for them to do their ranking electronically, and that we get that back to us so that we can put this in. I know the intention was to get it done here today and to get the administration going. But just for, because I don't think that anybody's trying to discount anybody, but I think what we're trying to do is make sure that we keep the administration, giving them enough time, because because they can't build their priorities in the budget until they know what we're doing. And we have a lot of adjustments that have happened where we haven't had a whole lot of meetings. So we're back to we only had one meeting last month. And we're in a unique situation because we're in the middle of our superintendent search. So it's taking up a lot of additional time that we would use for other things. But I don't think that there's any objection. I'll just throw it out there. Maybe we can do it electronically, put everyone's information out there in some way of being able to rank it, score it, come back, and knowing that when we come in, we have the results information. And then maybe on the 18th, we can just have a document that's based off of that information and then cast and move the vote with it.
I'm fine
That's
with
just my
that, and Ms. Smith, I apologize, but there's no ill intent in not being forthright with the information. It is just strictly, this is what we have to work with
I'm not
right now.
implying that there
Okay.
was.
Okay, I just want to make sure of that. Ms. Campson?
First of all, thank you for trying to get all this together. I know that we're all really rushed with all the work we're doing with the superintendent search. My concern, not all my stuff's on here either, by the way, but my concern is some of it in the combining has lost its meaning. For example, when we look at teacher salaries, I very clearly, as did you, I know, and I haven't read everyone else's on teacher salaries, said that I wanted a 2% over the top of any step increases that were part of the pay study over the suppressed, when we compressed the steps. So last year, as we know, that was listed as the raise when it was just a meeting that phase of the thing. So this, when it says teacher compensation regarding raises and direction on phase 4 of the compensation study, that doesn't address giving teachers a raise beyond fixing those steps, which left some people with no raise last year. So I think that it was just, that wasn't clear. And then under the full-time reading math specialist, it isn't saying in every school, because that's the equal part. And then it goes into the Title I instructional specialist and the ESSA full-time reading and math interventionist and specialist that were supposed to be the step 2 in the equity piece to give those schools, especially the ESSA schools, their extra layer of support. So I think it kind of lost its meaning in trying to get it all together. So, I would be uncomfortable with the way both, those are my 2 top priorities, are the teacher raises and then the additional instructional support, and yet they're not written the way I was looking at it. So that was my concern.
Mr. Jordan?
I'd just like to know if we can maybe take it up to a higher level, because I want to make sure that we have a shared understanding of what we mean by budget priorities. Because when I look at the list, and you all can see even in my comments, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to be prescriptive in what we are setting as a priority, or are we trying to be broader and then having the superintendent and the administration be able to come back with recommendations based upon the broad objectives that we set? So for example, if the goal is to increase compensation, or advanced compensation above and beyond the pay and comp study, then to me, having the administration understand that that is if that ends up being a board priority, that would be something we would like to see it occur. They then, through their processes, may come back with some specific recommendations in the budget on how to get there. To me, what we have here, many of the things that we have here as budget items identified as priorities seem to be very prescriptive in its nature. And if that's our intent, to be prescriptive, then I think we need to be clear about that in terms of the entire process. And I also, agree with the point that Ms. Basine was making. I mean, many of these things are already a part of ongoing processes, whether it's under educational planning, whether it's under alternative education, maintenance of school buildings. I'd just like to see if I can get a better understanding in putting this chart together, how we are defining budget priorities versus, to me, which in many of these almost come across as budget earmarks.
I think that it can be both. I think it's really what the board wants to decide. But I think at the end, what Dr. Birdsong needs is a clear picture and direction as to where she needs to focus attention. I think we can be both broad. And if we choose to be prescriptive, for example, an SRO in every elementary school, that is the board's decision. And so what I have heard all along from Dr. Birdsong is she doesn't want to have 10 priorities from Adele and 10 priorities from Lauren and 10 priorities from Mr. Clanton and 10 priorities from Ms. Basine. She needs some type of direction.
I agree with that.
And when we discussed them at the last meeting, I think that what Ms. Tanner was trying to do was to assimilate areas that were in common. And maybe she didn't put in the 2% part because she saw that, Adele commented on teacher compensation and Tanya commented on teacher compensation, and is that how you came
Yes.
about doing that? So let's work together on this. It's not a perfect process. We can, we know how much we want to make sure that we align our resources so that we are, again, getting at student outcomes. So let's have that as our focus. So I don't know if that answers your question, Mr. Jordan?
No, because I think to say that we can be prescriptive and broad are contradictory to me.
Well, Dr.
So-
Birdsong, what do you
Dr. Gabriel, if I can
need?
just
Oh.
finish a little bit. So, I'll yield.
So at the end of the day, I would like to know what the board's priorities are as it relates to the budget. And what I have observed, certainly not from this seat, in years past, is that the superintendent often has to go back and try to find a way to add things to the budget as a result of conversations with the board and with the public. And the administration will be working January to look at where we are with our department's budgets and to determine what our priorities are. And it would certainly make our job less challenging if we had an idea of what your priorities are so that we can plan accordingly. We certainly don't want to have to wait until the last minute, and I think some of that happened last year where, some things had to be changed because of last minute kind of requests. And so to make this as seamless as possible, I was thinking that the planning up front would alleviate all of that last minute trying to eliminate this to add that. And it would give us time to be thoughtful about decisions.
Ms. Campson?
And this is
Ms.
kind of,
Basine?
so I can get on the same plane as Mr. Jordan. So when you're talking about the difference, so for example, would you consider it appropriate for the school board to say, in general, we support teacher raises? Would that be considered to be prescriptive? I mean, or to say we support having additional instructional support in the classroom? In other words, should it be that general rather than saying instructional, rather than me saying I want reading and math specialists in every building? general budget, because that's your budget, but then I added Title I stuff, which isn't even in the budget you're working on, because I was trying to show the layers of support that were equality versus equity. But so instead, I would just say, I want to see more instructional support personnel in our schools, and then you would determine
I think
what that's
more
needed.
appropriate.
More appropriate. And so
Yes.
teacher raises, you don't need me to say, I want 2%, and I want it to be above the compensation pay.
Because at the end of the day, it may not be realistic, even though I think we need to ask for what we need and not necessarily what we may believe to be realistic, but at the end of the day, we're gonna be working with a number.
Right.
And so while you may want an additional 20 math or reading specialists, then certainly we're
Yes,
gonna
I
have
do.
to look
Yes, I
at
do.
eliminating something else. And so what does that look like?
Right, and so and instead of saying, I want to
And letting
see.
us decide where they go.
Right, instead of saying I want to see a security staff member in every elementary school, I would say I want to see an increase in security in the building.
Exactly,
And then
because
you would
every
determine how it
elementary
goes.
school-
Is, Mr. Jordan, is that kind of the difference that you were saying? So
Yes.
that if I could take what I had and take out all my details about what particular pocket of money I wanted it taken out of, you didn't need that information, is what you're trying to tell me.
No.
You actually already know how that works.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right, but that kind of sounded like what you were saying?
Yes,
Is to
another
kind of
reason-
keep us up here and not get in the weeds?
Yeah, another reason for that is I was also anticipating that we had other reports that may come forward. So, for example, the School and Safety Task Force, there may be some things that you all have looked at earlier. I don't know.
Well, see, that
But
won't come until the end of the school
My,
year.
my point is I'm just saying through that process, there may be some things that have bubbled up. We've been talking with the Facilities Committee about coming back to the board in January with some first cut items that to me may address many of these items that are listed under school buildings, feasibility studies, and so forth. But the administration that has the benefit of the big picture and knowing what has been accomplished to date and what hasn't, I think gives them an opportunity to come back to us with more prescriptive details on how to achieve the broad goals that we establish,
Well,
or
but
priorities.
But if your committee is not coming with the information until January, doesn't that make you miss the deadline to get I thought everyone
Not in my
had.
mind, because at least from the discussions we've been having thus far, all that's been tied back to the school board accountability plan, and this is a process that's been a 1, 3, 5-year process. So, in my opinion, I think the tendency of the board is to look at budget priorities in 1-year snapshots, and I don't think that they occur that way. I think that there are things that may get addressed in a 1-year snapshot. There are other things that get built over time. So there is work that's been done. There's activities that have been underway. There are recommendations like early start times that are already on the plate, if you will, or moving towards implementation. The budget should support those things.
Well, but doesn't it need to be in a timely manner so that when the superintendent starts working on putting it together in January, that she already has all of those recommendations?
So I can just tell you, I trust that the conversations that we've been having at the committee level, that the administration representatives who are there are communicating those things back to the administration and the team, so it's not like anything would come up like some big surprise. If I'm wrong, then you can correct me, but that's what I.
And that is the case,
Right.
especially with the Facilities Committee. Mr. Hazelett serves on that committee, and he keeps me and the team abreast of what's going on.
So then what would you right now ask us to do then, if this is too detailed?
Well, we have several pages of requests, and so again, as a board, would be helpful for us to know what your priorities are.
Right, so you'd want
Broadly.
general priorities, is what
Yes.
you're saying, like increased instructional staff and,
Teacher salaries, like increasing teacher
Teacher
salaries.
salaries.
And let us take a look at what that could look like and present some options to you.
and then look at increased instructional support staff in schools.
But we have to
Whatever your
build,
priorities are.
we have to have
Yes.
consensus with the board
Oh,
on
I'm
what
not
that is.
disagreeing. What I'm
And-
just saying is I'm just trying to clarify that the detail that we put here is more than you I spent a lot of time on mine, I'm just
can tell.
saying, but.
Everyone
But you can see the
spent time
general
on,
themes,
everyone spent
too.
time on, so
You can see
Ms.
the
Basine,
themes,
I know that you had your hand up, and then what we can do is kind of bring this to a close and figure out what our next steps are gonna be for this.
Okay. Well, I was gonna say, there are a few that I have that I know I can put on future items. There are some that I have that, or one at least, that's specific, but it's more so dealing, and that's the full-time assistant principal at St. Helena. When I look at this list, I see it nowhere on there, but it's more so dealing with equity. I'm aware what the SOQ says is the minimum requirement for an assistant principal, but I look at that as that's our baseline where when you reach this number, then you have to have it. There's nothing that says this school cannot have it. We know the challenges that are in that school, and we've done a great thing in putting a part-time assistant principal there. But I think we need to take that school to, as well as some others, to the next level and outfitting them with the resources that they need that's gonna help them be successful. So how I take that and articulate it differently into a budget item that it gets up here, I'd like that to be done.
Well, I
So
understand.
for example, she could say, because we have the same situation at Willoughby,
At Willoughby.
where there's no, the same, we got our preschool, and I don't think they even have a halftime. So, or maybe they do now? No. So would a Broadway, just for my clarification, be that what I asked for last year? Assistant principals in every single elementary and preschool. That was a request last year. So would that be, we would do that, and then you would work toward, like you did this year with putting the assistants in those two small those two small little schools?
And we could make recommendations around that and let you know if the data supports that.
Okay, so that would be the broad, trying to be more broad, like Mr. Jordan was telling us, okay?
Okay. So then, why don't we do this? Ms. Tanner, can you make sure that everybody has access to everybody's full comments? Most of them which were said publicly when we had our last meeting. So that's the first item. Can you work to make the budget items that are listed here in the categories, broad?
She's already put them together.
I've already put them together,
Right,
Yeah.
right.
and they have a copy of it.
Yeah, so, but I think that I'm hearing from some individuals that we need to make it a little bit more broad, versus what we have here. So we can work on the language of the categories to make it broad. Right?
And again, first, you guys
Right.
need to determine what it is
Yeah.
that.
So if you can just send that document out to everybody, and then folks can send in their comments to her, and then just copy the board on it, and then we can do our rankings and then have some time on the 18th to discuss it, and then give it to Dr. Birdsong.
And make sure if we had those back next week, maybe.
Yeah, so then we would need to have those in by, you want to say Sunday? Sunday evening? Does that work for everyone?
I do have a question. So we, as we work to get the funding formula established with council, whatever it was last year before last, part of that process has for them to share with us what we can expect based upon what it was, 29% of their formula.
30 cents on every dollar.
Yeah, have we received that?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think one of the things would be helpful in the process is just get that information, because at least it gives us some sense of,
And I can share the memo with you, and I know that they are projecting an additional $2 million. I think last year it was 125 million plus, and this year they're projecting at 127 million plus. Is that correct, Ms. Powell? So if you need a copy of that memo, I'm happy to provide that to you, but they are projecting an additional 2 million.
and then process-wise, so did we already have the public hearing?
We'll have that on the 18th.
So on
I
the
think that's
18th,
the first
then
one.
we will also hear from the public in terms of any thoughts that they have on our priorities.
The first one.
So next step, so that we are all clear, and Ms. Tanner is clear, everyone is to receive a copy of everyone's comments. Everyone is to provide feedback on the budget item chart by Sunday. And then, let's see here, I
That
guess.
feedback, are you saying our ranking?
Well, I think that we need to get your feedback and then send it back out with everybody's feedback and then do the ranking, because I want to make sure that everybody has consensus on what these items are before we do the ranking.
Okay, so we're basically inserting whatever we would like into this list.
Yeah, well,
To
I
a new
mean-
list.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
yeah, I mean, we
I know,
can,
I'm confused.
see, I was
what
just trying
feedback
to, I think,
means.
we need to narrow things down.
Okay.
And so I would say that we have to work together to respect what everyone has put in and understand that not all of our items are gonna be up there. But if we can narrow it down to, I think what we have here is how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 items. If we can narrow it down to 10 items and then rank them in order of 1 to 5, then I think that's gonna give Dr. Birdsong the best direction.
And I would suggest that today that you review these budget items to make sure that they're appropriate. These are the items that you want as the list to be disseminated back to the board.
Well, that's a great suggestion, but I'm hearing from some that their thoughts may not all be captured here. And so,
And
I
can
mean,
that be discussed now?
we can discuss it now.
What is it we're,
So,
Because this list it sounds like it's not all inclusive. That's what I think I'm hearing from the board. And so my thinking is, why would you use this if it doesn't incorporate the major things that you would like it to before you start prioritizing?
I think it was inclusive to Ms. Tanner's best ability. based
Well,
on the feedback.
I hear
Yeah.
that, but.
yeah, and that's gonna be my
not
point.
what-
I think it puts Ms. Tanner in an awkward position of trying to
Absolutely.
have an understanding of what each of us is doing. It seems to me that
So
maybe,
then if
maybe you can ask a couple of us to work on it, and we can come back and,
It's just, so let's just go down to item number 1 then.
so, what,
But
I think we're
we submitted information in, and I thought we agreed based on the priorities, because we saw what Ms. Campson gave, and we agreed that that was a good way of submitting the information. So we had priority 1, 2, or goal 1, 2, 3. Correct? We saw that. Does that have most of us in the back end? So if we just group them back in so that we can see them on each one of the goals and priorities, allow us to see them and put some type of ranking on it, that we can, that each board member can come back. I mean, I want to keep it moving. I know the 18th is a deadline on it, but I don't want to get ourselves pigeonholed and that we're not getting things done. I know Mr. Jordan has said a couple individuals to work on it. I'll be more than happy to put myself out there to help work on it.
Okay.
Anybody else wants to work?
While we're waiting to see who volunteers, could I just say, so for example, is what we're saying is, instead of full-time math reading specialist, Title I instructional specialist, which doesn't have anything to do with this budget, ESSA and full-time Title I, instead we just say increase instructional support staff in schools.
Yes,
That's what we give you. And so where we got all this teacher compensation, step
yeah,
corrections,
Yeah.
raises over that, we just put increase teacher pay.
compensation.
Seems pretty easy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All
Right.
right, maintenance of schools, address deferred maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Ms. Smith?
Carlos, I'll work with you.
Okay, all right, so then what we will do is actually just take the document that's sent out and make a list
Yeah.
with the priorities on it. And then can you all come up with the 10 items and then send it out to everybody, and then we can rank it based on the 10 that you give us? How does that sound?
We'll work out.
Okay, so can you get that out to us by Sunday?
Okay, I've got down Sunday?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, okay, so Thank you very much, Mr. Clanton. Ms. Smith, you will work on compiling the budget items and get that out to us on Sunday, and then we will then shoot it back out to you all with our rankings of 1 to 5.
Those two, Mr. Clanton.
We're not sending them anything. They're gonna take what we've already submitted, and they're going to determine, it's gonna take it out of Ms. Tanner, and they're gonna be the ones looking at it, because they have the frame of mind that we're looking at based on today's
Then they'll send
discussion.
them to us
And then
Sunday.
they'll just basically make these categories a little bit more broad, okay? And then we'll rank it, and we'll deliver it to Dr. Birdsong on the 18th. I like that.
Ms. Tanner, just send that to.
Just one other question on the list that we have. So it looks like all of us aren't represented. Is that by intent, or did some folks just not send anything in?
What do you mean?
So on this document,
Huh?
I see Gabriel, Basine, Campson, Smith, but I don't see Martin, whoever's left. And then if you go to,
Mine's kinda got absorbed into,
I'm sorry?
my comments, they kinda got absorbed into others, so no, I'm not on there.
And I sent a separate document.
That's fine.
Right, but I'm just saying, if we're gonna go through it, can we have everybody's,
I can forward that.
everybody's submission?
So, do you wanna just write yours out then? Okay.
So, every copy of everybody's documents together, that we all have it. Ms. Smith and myself will work, and then we'll have a compiled list back Sunday. Good.
All right.
And that way we'll have plenty of time to look at it before we have a
Before the
discussion at the work
Right.
session in 2 weeks. Okay.
Okay, great. Okay. So the next item for discussion is the actual board's budget. Ms. Tanner, do you have a copy of the board budget for everyone? I know that you
I know
all
I sent
have.
an email
It's an
version
email, okay.
before.
Yeah.
And it has year-to-date actuals on there, which might be helpful.
Will that budget include the money that we're spending on the superintendent's search, Dr. Gabriel? It will, so we have to figure out where that comes from,
Yeah.
okay.
And actually, so this is our first look at our budget for this year, having the discussion for what we want to project it for next year. So what I'd like to do is, if you have any thoughts, just general thoughts on our budget, what you would like to preserve, what you would like to look at as far as any thoughts on areas where you think that we could dial back. I know that one item that we have to be cognizant of is the commitment that we have made to the scholarship recipients. So we need to make sure that we have at least $10,000 allocated for them within our budget.
And do we have some approximate amount of money that that the cost of the superintendent search is?
Yes,
You already
when
have
Ms.
that,
Tanner
okay.
gets back, she can
Okay.
share that information with us. So while she's working on getting that to everyone, is there anybody who has any comments on our budget to begin with?
We haven't seen it lately.
I'd like to look at it first.
Okay.
Existing budget?
Does
Our
this
budget
one
is
have
right
the
now.
3 years or just this current year?
It's this year-to-date from,
Okay, it's just this year,
11/12,
okay.
November the 12th, even though I have one more recent.
So to this one, we're going to be adding the scholarship and the superintendent search. Okay.
Identified.
Well,
I'm confused. Why are we adding the search if this is for
No, the
next
search,
year's
yeah,
budget?
the search isn't included for next year's budget.
Oh, that's,
It's
so
what
we
we're
have to go
absorbing
back
in
and
this year's
figure out
budget.
for this year.
No, well,
No, it's
I'll
in
pay for it.
contract services,
Yeah.
Ms. Campson.
Excuse me?
It should be in a contract services that's already
It's right there.
Purchase
Pearson.
in your budget.
it's,
The purchasing or
The third one from the
purchasing
bottom.
Contract
Keep coming down, right?
services,
Oh, punch contract.
yes,
Oh, so that'll,
You see
oh,
McPherson and
yeah,
Jackson?
that's where,
Jacobson?
right.
No, go down some more. It's got McPherson.
Oh, there it is.
Okay.
okay. But all the other costs. Transportation.
So
It
if I,
would still come out of contract services.
and so the resolution that we approved with the scholarship, that's coming out of the, is it travel, meals, and lodging line?
For this year, that's where it came from. And if we want to propose that, if we want to stay budget neutral for next year, then we need to cut somewhere else in order to accommodate that, the $10,000 scholarship, and we need to come to consensus on where that accommodation would be, if you want to stay budget neutral.
Can you rephrase that, because I'm not understanding.
You mean if we want this year's budget to be the same amount as next year's budget? I mean, I would think that we would approach our school board budget as any other department, determine what we feel we need, and then go from there. So what's the specific task you want us to do now? So I just know what you're asking.
I'm asking for everyone to share any thoughts that they have at this moment in time regarding our budget. Is there anything that you feel like you want to make sure that we certainly preserve? Are there areas that you think that we can tighten the belt straps? Ms. Campson?
I think we spend a lot of money on professional development for the school board, especially when you compare to the amounts of money that are spent on people who are providing direct instruction. So it's a lot of money that goes there per board member, 50, 54, 75, 80, 90, over $90,000 for 7 people. I mentioned it last year too. It seems like an awfully lot of money.
So is your suggestion that we take a look at our budget and decrease?
Well, I'd like to
Our
see how,
professional development.
that's why I was saying, I think one time we got a 3-year one, but that showed the 3-year progress.
Can get that
Are we
quickly.
actually, I doubt that we're actually spending that much money, just based on what I see, or when I go, 1 or 2 conferences. I mean, there's a lot of conferences that are attended by people on the school board and in central office, and when you compare that to what happens in the schoolhouse, there is a huge gap.
Okay.
And that's something that we need to look at as money is tight.
Okay.
I have a question around that. What, we do have in our budget, the school board, not the school board budget, in the school budget, there is professional development budgeted, right? So it's not that there isn't.
Right.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that there's
Is
not
that, does that
budgeted.
generally get used to the fullest? or-
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So I know, I guess for me, I'm just trying to, I see where we've encumbered so far for this year and then what's left in the balance. But I guess to kind of talk about future would really help if I knew what we spent maybe over the last year or
Oh,
two.
yeah, that's what I just said.
Okay.
We're
So
pulling that right
is that
now
what-
for you.
Okay.
So what are
But
we
you
actually
can see
spending?
right now what you've spent so far this year. You see under the column,
So,
year-to-date actuals.
and so in our organizational memberships, which is, I'm just looking at large figures here. We're, I guess VSBA is included in that.
Yes.
Council of Great City Schools, Cube, National School Board Association, do we pay fees to them as well? It's 4. Anything I'm missing?
I think those are the major ones,
Council of Great City School, NSBA, VSBA.
in Q, which NSBA/Q.
Those are big ticket items too. Be interesting to know what school boards across the region are spending on this kind of stuff. Do they belong to all these organizations? The prices are really high.
Hold on a second. Let Carlos finish.
So where I'm looking at, like, so VSBA, we pay a membership fee, but then we also pay, there also are professional development governance trainings. There's a fee we pay for them there. And then there's, I guess with the membership that we're getting, in the policy
No, I
piece.
think that's separate.
Separate.
Is that another- So that's separate outside of that.
Yep.
So there,
The Council of Great City Schools.
Subscription for policies is separate.
Okay, so so the Council of Great City Schools is roughly $39,000. The
There we go, right.
VSBA membership is $13,000. Cube fees and NSBA are roughly $13,000. The policy services subscription is roughly $3,700.
So my question is, so Mr. Jordan, are we getting a discount or some fee with you being president this year?
Good try, good try.
Well, since you ask,
Yes.
I actually think that being the board of directors of a learning institution, that the board ought to set the example of saying that being a learning board and having professional development is something that we value. And I think that not only should the board, rather than, I'm not sure about the comparison of the board's budget on professional development in comparison to others. We always start conversations about asking for what we need. So to me, if the professional development within the administration is an area of priority, then I think that should show up as a priority as part of the budget. I think that when you look at the Council of Great City Schools membership, it goes beyond the board. There's constant administration members who are receiving support and attending conferences and activities as relates to the Council of Great City Schools. CUBE, we know CUBE focuses on urban boards of education, and then VSBA. So I don't particularly think we have an overabundance of memberships. I think we probably can be more effective and efficient in how we leverage the resources that we have. But I, for one, would advocate for us to consider as a priority for the board as much professional development as we feel we need to be effective in our jobs.
And Mr. Jordan, I would agree. And then where I started at those is I wanted to kind of to set the stage that there are things that we receive from each of these organizations. And I know that the first thing we look at, it's $72,000, but there are a lot of, we're even talking about our special education review. Well, we're getting that from the Council of Great City Schools.
We're paying for it, though.
We're paying for it.
But they're,
Not free.
But our membership allows us to.
but our membership allows us to get that. We've had some things for
Right.
I just went out of there. But we've looked at, infrastructures and things like that. They've done a lot of different things for us, and we've been a part of these groups for a very long time. I think that there's a place, and I know that Ms. Talbot has brought us this list here, that we could probably, in our meals and lodging and travel and things, that we don't expense all of those funds every year. But, just also be cautious that, we don't get too tight on it, that we get into a situation. But we've even had discussions about prioritizing where we would go to one conference as a leadership team, and then kind of work around from that, that there are other ones that, not all of us are going to, but based on our roles and committees and so forth and interests, that we would go. So, I don't know, I just set it up for that to the rest of the board when we look at this budget, that there are some things that we could potentially cut and tighten up on, because we haven't expensed all the funds in it every year.
So can we have, did you have something to say? Can we have Ms. Tanner then go back and review the budget and look at the areas that we have had year over year consistent, we haven't used the full funds, and then have her come out with a projected budget request for us to follow as it pertains to some of the, like the postage and the supplies and the equipment, not touch travel at this time, and then come back and look at the travel. If we can determine maybe one or two conferences that we can all attend, and make sure that we at least allocate the funds for that.
I want to be minimized to one or two conferences.
Well, these are just one or two that we budget for that everyone will be attending.
Oh, okay.
And I think we still go with the interest that people may have.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can resend, I forwarded to you all earlier in the year, the return on investment / impact report that we received from the Council of Great City Schools. I know VSBA just sent out their annual report. I'm not sure if we get something similar to that from NSBA CUBE, but I think part of it is, let's look at what our return on investment has been, and consider other things as we move forward. There's been some discussion around board compensation. So if that's going to come up, that's something that also has to be
Thought you were gonna talk about
factored
that.
into as
Yeah.
well.
Actually, Ms. Martin wanted to talk about that a little bit, so.
Right.
Go ahead.
But I do have a, I have a question about this, though.
Mhm.
This seems very incomplete to me. Why is it that our 2019 actuals for food supplies is 0? What am I not understanding about this? It just doesn't seem to be a real reflection of.
Martin most likely got charged to contract services if it's catering.
Okay, so I'm just not seeing the real cost here in our budget. There are a lot of there's missing information here, and also compensation's not even on here.
Compensation would be under, let's see.
It's not included.
I don't see it.
It's a separate budget than your budget.
Okay.
I mean, it does provide for the clerk and school board members, but it's a separate component, so it doesn't come out of the school board members' budget.
I'm just
This
saying,
budget.
this is hard to make it, to draw from whenever there's information that's not here. So if there's information that's not here, I want to know where it's being pulled from.
So what would be helpful for you? Would it be helpful to have perhaps
Instead
what
of
was
just saying
budgeted and what was
0.
left?
Well, I mean, it says right here, for example, it says nothing was spent, because there's a dash, that's a 0 in accounting. So, but I'd like a note or a footnote accounting for where these things are.
Which probably means there
In the
wasn't a
broader
GL line loaded in that amount, if there's a dash. Ms. Tal, you want to come up over to the, please, thank you.
Well, all of these here, I mean, these were spent somewhere, right?
And so it might be helpful, Ms.
I
Tal,
need
to just
some-
provide a general overview of the whole document. Have a seat,
I didn't
please.
get a copy.
Here, oh, okay.
Sorry, thank you.
I have two. Oh, here's another.
Um,
I know I have two.
Ms. Martin, most likely if it's 0 actuals because nothing was charged to that line. And if you felt like you might have spent something, it could be charged on another account. For example, for food, most likely it got charged to contracts of services because if it's a catered, it has to be charged to contract services. We only charge items to food supplies when we go to like Farm Fresh and stuff like that. So I don't know if they didn't do that last year.
I mean, that's good information to know, but
Just
whenever I'm
haven't attended
handed
yet.
this form, I want to see that in a footnote, that this line means
Okay.
That's what the
X,
dashes
and
mean.
how much was charged to contract services for our catering last year, and have that deducted from the 10,000 that was budgeted.
Okay.
So maybe what was allocated and then what was utilized.
Okay. All right.
What each of these budget lines actually mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
We used to have them on cards, and it told you what every little, on a sheet. Do we still have that?
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because you could look it up.
Okay,
Can we talk about compensation?
sure.
Okay. So compensation has been brought up a couple of times, and we did not change our policy. We voted on to accept the broader policy last month, I believe. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to put this out to the public, because this is something that isn't broadly known about the board compensation, that we are currently compensated for $3,000 a year. That doesn't include any kind of benefits or anything, it's just $3,000. It's the actual cap of what an appointed board can make. But as of the first fully elected school board of Norfolk, we are actually eligible to receive the same salary compensation as our city council, which is currently maxed out as at $28,000, and the mayor is at $30,000 annually, and so we could essentially adopt, to raise our money to that level, whereas everyone except for the chair would be making $28,000, and then the chair would be compensated the $30,000. The other new revelation that we had recently was that the school board, as an elected body, is also eligible to buy into the healthcare state's healthcare system. And so some of us have elected to do that. I will say one of the disadvantages or another obstacle to that is being compensated at the 3,000 range. Means that to buy into the healthcare system, you actually end up having to owe money to the school, which is a whole new process that needs to be ironed out. But also, being compensated for $3,000 at the appointed level puts us as the lowest elected school board in the state. So, so I'm just putting that out there to really educate and say this publicly. I know a lot of people don't like to talk about compensation, but I think I always like to take the opportunity to inform the public. But also, in order for us to make the decision to change our compensation, it needs to be done by end of calendar year prior to an election year, and then would go into effect at the beginning, July 1st of the following fiscal year. So that means that if we were to change our compensation, and I'm not advocating to do this, at the city's level or whatnot, I'm not throwing any numbers out there, and if we wanted to do this, that would be a separate discussion. But to say that if we wanted to change our salary in this go-round, we'd have to make that decision and vote on it by our December 18th meeting for it to go into effect July 1st, 2020. Otherwise, we could make the decision anytime thereafter, July 1st of 2020, and before December 31st of 2021, because 2022 will be the next, May of 2022 would be the next election cycle, and then if we did change it, it would go into effect in July 1st of 2022. So I just wanted to make sure all that information is publicly and accurately.
And Ms. Martin, when you had asked to bring this topic up as it pertained to the budget, I also want you to talk about the other thing that you had mentioned about what it means to be on the board and to have equitable representation as
Right.
regards to the compensation.
Right. So what happens when you have, we talk about equity in our schools and, equitable access to opportunities and the needs of our students and of course our employees. What this pay structure does is, if we wanted to build equity into the electoral process and build representation of those that we serve in the public, at a rate of $3,000 a year, it really does make the status of being on the school board, an elite status. It's not something that the general public may be able to do, because the time that we spend, and we all know this is a full-time job, a full-time commitment, and there are many people that would probably be very valuable to this position that wouldn't be able to afford to do that. Is that what you're referring to?
Right. Any questions?
No, other than, I've concurred, and I think I even shared it earlier at one point, that I think last month we had almost a 12-hour meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Today we've been here, and so even for myself working, in my certain position, I take a zero. I don't earn any dollars when I'm here working for the school board, and of course I stepped up to do this. But when you equate it to $52 a week, essentially, is what a school board member makes, and you look at the number of meetings, community meetings, requests for sponsorship, things like that, and you look at where we are within the Commonwealth of Virginia, it is an equitable thing when I look at it, because yes, I may be in a position, any of us are in a position where we can do that and be able to serve, but if there was a parent or someone else who didn't have the ability to be able to have a salary or and they're working hourly, it does become something that becomes a barrier. And I'm not just looking at myself, but I also look at the decisions that we make and how it affects the entire board going forward.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Ms. Martin. So, and to keep with our schedule, what we would like to go ahead and do, then I've taken a couple of notes. Ms. Campson would like to have further information on the professional development, where we are and how we have spent that over the past 3 years. Mr. Clinton, I believe that this document that Dr. Birdsong has provided kind of gives us what we've spent this year to budget versus actuals.
I'm looking at what Lauren wants.
And then,
Projection.
most importantly, getting some clarification on the line items, what has actually been spent, and if there are dashes or zeros, footnotes as to where those items are. Is there anything else further that we need at this point before we go into our, to pick this discussion back up on the 18th for our board?
So to get back to the board compensation piece, so if there is action that is required before the end of the year, what are the next steps? I mean, I think we need to have a discussion about what it is, all of us, what we're all thinking, because some of us may have a differing perspective on that as well. And so I think we need to have that discussion. So what are the next steps for?
Well, the next steps, as I see it, as Ms. Martin has outlined, is that if we are going to take action on any type of compensation change, then that action would need to be done by the end of December 31st. And that would have effect, not next year, but the year after, correct?
If we were to change, the only reason we'd need to act before December 31st is so that it would be, whatever changes made would be implemented on July 1st of 2020. But if we wait until after January 1st of 2020 and make that change, then it would go into effect in July 1st of 2022. There has to be,
By
it has to
law,
be before the election.
If you are going to increase your salary as an elected board, you have to do it by December 31st of the year before an election.
Right.
And then it will become effect at the start of the fiscal year after the election.
Yeah.
The idea is that there has to be an election after you've increased your salary before you can actually receive the invoice.
Right. I understand all of that. That's not my question. I'm saying, when are we gonna have time to have discussion around that, given that we have one additional meeting before that, if that is the desire of the board to take some action, whether to support or to decline, we have to, I'm asking what the next step is.
You would probably need to have it today or next on the 18th, because you would need to vote on the 18th unless there was another meeting called.
Right.
Right, so,
right now, on our agenda, we have from 4 to 5:30 to discuss the district benchmark analysis. So if we want to give ourselves, 10 minutes to kind of start this discussion and then lead into the district benchmarks, or if we want to stay on the agenda, I would say that we can, it's the will of the board how you all want to proceed.
So, Madam Chair, if I can, this isn't a policy change, right? Okay. So I'm a big believer in not just having meaningless conversation, but we should be talking about something, and there should be something in front of us. In other words, it should be an amount. It should be saying, this is what we're proposing.
Right.
So if it could be the will of the board, to just refer this to a committee. It could be a committee of 2 to come back with a proposal and to submit that to the board so that we have something to discuss, rather than just having everyone's free-flowing ideas that we're talking about an item. And then we can move to either vote it up or vote it down or suspend it to some other time. But just to have back and forth is not going to get us anywhere. I think if we just refer it to committee, we could set up a special committee to do it, and then we send something back. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to move. Well, let me stop that. Who'd like to work on it?
I have information.
So, Ms. Martin and,
Okay.
No, I have a comment,
okay.
question. I like, in that presentation, I'd like to be able to understand how this budget impacts, not this budget, how an increase in our salary impacts the overall budget of the district. Because it is going to have an impact on the overall budget of the district. And if we're talking about health insurance as well, that is an additional cost, because typically with health insurance, there is a cost sharing portion, where the employer pays one portion of it and the employee pays another portion of it. There's also the discussion of benefits. How is that gonna fit in it? So it's more than just a simple salary when we start talking about compensation. And again, how all of that impacts the overall budget, and where are we gonna take it from? Because we're gonna have to take it from somewhere. And what impact does that have on instruction, academic achievement? We need to know all of that, and not just numbers of, here's what we came up with as a potential salary, but the whole package, the whole impact. And then we can make an informed decision
Right.
as to what we would like or not like.
And I think that those are great points, and
Right.
I'll make sure that I include them in the motion. If there isn't anyone else with that one, I'll work with you, Ms. Martin. And Dr. Birdsong, if we can work with the appropriate staff members.
Al would be the staff member.
Got it. So,
Provide all that information.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move to create a special committee on looking at school board compensation. That would include Ms. Martin and myself. That will look at the whole compensation discussion regarding impact on the district's budget, cost sharing and benefits, and to report back to the board with a recommendation and that additional information.
On what date?
We're gonna, so what's the Friday before? We'll report back, but I think we need to, what's the Friday before?
The 13th.
So that we have it ready to be uploaded by the 13th?
Madam Chair, if you all would share, I just pulled up a news article and a report that showed the compensation by school division. If you have that same report, can you just share it? I just emailed it to all of you.
Well, there's the news article that came out after Portsmouth and surrounding cities had changed their compensation. Are you talking about the Virginia pilot article?
No.
Because I also have a spreadsheet that's
Okay,
through
so maybe it's
from
the same
VSBA
spreadsheet.
that has all of the districts in Virginia, and it does not assign them as appointed or elected. I don't know if that matters to you, but but we do, of course, know. I was really paying more attention to our region, just to see where we stood.
Yeah, well, I emailed you all an article and also probably the same spreadsheet. I'll just ask if you have it, can you just share it so we all have the same information?
So we need a second.
You could probably tell appointed school boards have no authority to set their salaries. They're set by the General Assembly, and they're very low. So that chances are, you'll see elected school boards, their salaries are above those. I can get the statute and send you that sets the salaries for appointed school boards and lists which school boards are left in Virginia that are still appointed. And I'll email that. I can email it to the full board for everybody's information.
Is there a second for the motion that Mr. Klein has on the floor?
Second.
Second. Is there any further discussion? Right.
Basine?
Nay, at this time, I don't feel that we should be considering our school board compensation or changing it at this time.
Okay. The motion is to have just a committee just look at it. There's no proposal to change it. They're just looking at it and bringing back information. That's what the proposal is.
I guess I think it's gonna. I don't think our time should be used to look at it at this time. So how about that? I put it that way.
Okay. Campson?
Yes.
Clanton?
Yes.
Smith?
I'm gonna say no.
Martin?
Yes.
Jordan?
Aye.
He said
Oh, I'm sorry, couldn't hear.
He did.
Gabriel?
Aye. Okay. Okay. So we'll just look forward to hearing back from you all on what the information is. That's all. Okay. Great. I really do appreciate everybody's thoughtful input in this process. Again, I know that the process is not perfect, but everyone collectively, I think, offers very, very good information, and I do appreciate it. And it's going to get us to an equitable budget that allocates resources to the best student outcomes. So let's go ahead and transition over to the next part of our meeting. Dr. Birdsong.
Good afternoon, Dr. Gabriel, Mr. Clanton, members of the board and administration. At this time, we will be presenting to you the results of the PALS assessment administration from the fall and Q1 district benchmark assessment data. And so we have members of our CNI team here today who will be providing that information to you, as well as our 3 illustrious principals. So let me give you some information about how we would like to present the information to you. T. Gwynn is going to start the presentation by giving us an overview of the PALS assessment, how we utilize the data from the assessment, how frequently the assessment is administered, et cetera. Then Mr. Brady will provide an overview of the district benchmark assessment data, how that data can be used by the school board, by the administration, how often it's utilized, and our philosophy behind that moving forward. And then we're going to have a presentation by Gwen Collins and Rhonda White with reading and math. They will talk about the results at a very high level, and then talk about the implications for our work moving forward and our next steps as an administration. And then we have Jennifer Lopez, Jenny from the block, and Adrienne, that's what we call her, it's kind of a fun name. And she really is Jennifer Lopez, though. Adrienne Britton, they're going to provide the DBA data for science and social studies, again, with implications and our next steps. And for the highlight of the evening, we have, again, our 3 illustrious principals, Alana Balthazar, Ingleside, Patrick Doyle at Blair, and we have Letitia Wade Jenkins, Lake Taylor High School. They will discuss information about their instructional focus for their buildings and how central office works to support their instructional efforts. So without further ado, I turn it over to our instructional team. Thank you. Thank you.
Actually,
And Dr. Babley, you want to start us off?
right, I just have a few brief statements, and good afternoon, Dr. Birdsong, Dr. Gabriel, and members of the board. Our division benchmark assessments, commonly known as DBAs, have been in place for a very, very long time. And so we have changed our assessments according to the standards as well as to the test formats. These assessments are both formative and summative in nature, but more formative, and are used by our instructional staff to diversify instruction as well as implement interventions. And so now I'll just turn it over to Ms. T. Wynn from the Assessment Research and Accountability Department.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Some background information about our division benchmark assessments. What we try to do is we mirror those that are administered at the end of the year with our Virginia SOLs. So currently, our division benchmark assessments are criterion reference test, and they're administered online through our assessment application system, SchoolNet. We do have paper pencil format for those students who require that format due to accommodation requirement. Currently, we are using those assessments based on the different standards that are addressed during the quarters, and so we administer those tests during Q1, Q2, and in some of our instances, Q3 or a mock SOL assessment towards the spring administration. We use that data to give us an indication of instruction and estimate of mastery of those particular standards that were addressed during those time periods. Our assessments range anywhere from about 20 items to 30 items or even 40 items, depending on the grade level and the subject area. And going back to how we try to mirror those with our SOL assessments, we also include 15% of those items are technology-enhanced items, your drag and drops, your open response. So again, trying to give students exposure to the variety of items that they would see on the end-of-year test. So as Dr. Bailey had mentioned, they both give us formative information, but summative as well. And from the assessment data, we give 3 different tiers of information, identifying students as proficient, which is a range of 70 to 100, needs improvement, which is 69 to 50, or those students who do not meet, which is 49 or below. And from that data, we make some adjustments in our instructional practice to make sure that all of our students are prepared. So what you have here is just some sample reports that SchoolNet gives us. They give us information at a district level, but they also provide schools with our principals and teacher school-based and classroom-based information as well. So what you see here is it gives you summative information, so it gives us a quick snapshot of what is going on in our various schools, in our classrooms, but it also gives us more detailed information such as item analysis. It gives us item descriptors and item discrimination index, so it gives us some perspectives as far as our items to make sure that we are assessing appropriately for our students. And if you look at the third view there, that's a sample of an item analysis. We do look at that and make sure our items are written well within our psychometric properties there. Yeah.
So what type of sample is this? Is it a statistical sample that we can have a certain level of probability in the conclusions that we're drawing on it? Or is it just a random sample of X number of students within a school that we can't really make a certain measure of deviation in our decision-making?
Okay, sure.
Help us understand that.
Okay, it's a great question. It gives us, depending on the report that you're looking at, generally speaking, our division benchmark assessments are designed to give us two levels of information. A, how are our students doing based on the standards or objectives that are being addressed? So that gives you classroom-based information for the teacher to understand, is that student understanding or am I teaching that particular standard well enough for the student to understand? But we also do, if you're asking as far as a predictive measure, we do run an item analysis or regression study every few years or so to make sure that our tests are in line with, if you will, correlation or predictive measures with SOL performance. And so that's how the different bands are standard, I guess, for identifying students who are proficient, needs improvement, or does not meet.
So does this give us that? These that are being presented to us now, does that?
The sample reports that you see, no, but I think later on in the other reports and the information that will be shared will give you a different, will give you some perspective on how the students are doing, yes.
Okay. I know that Ms. Basine had a question, but did we want to get through the presentation first and then do questions at the end?
And I was going to suggest that allow each presenter to complete their portion of the presentation, and then certainly we plan for an hour of presentation and then 30 minutes questions, but certainly we anticipate questions throughout the presentation. So when Mrs. Gwynn is finished, Ms. Bay is finished with her presentation, then we would respectfully ask that you wait until that time to ask questions.
Okay.
Just so they can get through the information, and they may answer the questions before being asked.
Okay. Our aim from curriculum and instruction today is to provide you with an understanding of student achievement during the first quarter of the school year, our strengths, our weaknesses, and what those next steps are that are being planned by curriculum and instruction to ensure that students are learning at the expected levels throughout the rest of the year. As has been said by Dr. Birdsong, the data that you're seeing is that very high level data analysis. It's that district view, but I want to assure you that the data analysis from curriculum and instruction and the next steps that we have planned does not stop at that district level view. Content offices use this data to identify individual schools that are in need of support, and they start drilling down from there to grade levels within those schools that are in need of support, down to subject levels, down to individual teachers in classrooms. The DBAs produce a lot of green flags and also red flags. And we zero in on where those deficiencies are so that we can provide that support. And we also drill down to the student level within those classrooms. We are currently meeting with principals, every principal. We are meeting with this week, and we will conclude on Monday in looking at the data and collaboratively coming up with a customized plan of support for that school, targeted PD for teachers, for grade levels, whatever is necessary, and we collaborate on that. We also work with individual teachers so that they do the same thing with their student data. And so they will identify individual student strengths and weaknesses. They can identify students who might be ready for acceleration. They'll be identifying students who are in need of remediation or intervention. And then we use subsequent benchmarks to monitor that student progress to see if they are learning at the levels that we need, if the interventions are working. I remember in a previous meeting, the board has inquired as to how we provide support for this school or that school or this group of schools. It starts here with the benchmark data so that we can customize what we're doing for each of those schools in collaboration with the principal. So support being provided for one school or one group of teachers at a building could be very different than what's being provided at another school. I also want to update you on our focus on literacy in the school division and our non-negotiable in curriculum and instruction about reading and writing and critical thinking every day in every subject. Right? We are learning that we need to interlace reading and writing with our content areas, with our subjects, that our history and our science and our math can't exist as content silos in the elementary schools, where students go through the schedule and they take history at this time, then they take writing, and then maybe they take math, and then they take reading. Reading and writing is the spine that intersects all of those courses, all of those subjects. We're encouraging and providing PD for teachers as well as principals on how we weave reading and writing and critical thinking into those subject areas, how we use the content in those subject areas to provide students content to read about, to write about, to think about. And we started training principals at last month's principal meeting on what that looks like. And last month it was in social studies. And so our history and English office combined on a lesson that the principals and assistant principals went through, where it was social studies content, but they were reading, they were writing, they were critically thinking. And so you couldn't tell if that was it a social studies lesson? Was it a reading lesson? Was it a writing lesson? And the principals, the feedback we got was, we need this for science. We need to see what this looks like in science and also in math. And they said our teachers need to experience this. And so, so we're going to do a science lesson with reading and writing and critical thinking in it at the December meeting. And we are restructuring our January PD so that our elementary teachers will report to sites by grade level. And they will spend the day learning how to design lessons that are infused with reading and writing and critical thinking, so that we can get that reading time in, that writing time in, and as they're doing so, understand that content. and so interlacing that information. And so we're looking forward to being able to provide that for our elementary teachers. And so, talking about literacy, we'll have Ms. Collins come up and go over the reading benchmark data with you and what her office is doing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Excited to talk about our PALS and DBA data with you all today around reading. There we go. So the first data that I have here, this is our PALS data, and PALS is our phonological awareness literacy screening, and we give this to all of our kindergarten through second grade students 3 times a year, so in the fall, mid-year, and then in the spring. And then for our third grade students, we give PALS to our third graders who are identified in the spring of second grade, so that we can see what literacy deficits those students have. PALS is very different from the DBA. So you either meet the PALS benchmark or you are below the PALS benchmark. So if you're below the PALS benchmark, that means you have a deficit in literacy, and it also is what PALS says you are now identified as having that deficit, and we provide interventions to the students that are identified. And you can see the PALS benchmark is a floor, not a ceiling. So when we look at our students, when you look at grade 2, we are concerned because you see that 32% of our second graders are below the PALS benchmark, meaning that they have literacy deficits. That is a large number, but it is, when you look at the number of second graders identified compared to last year's second graders, there's less students identified this year than there were last year. And so that's our PALS data.
How many were last year? Can I ask that?
I'm sorry, what?
How many were identified last year?
You want the actual
Or percentage, or do you know?
number? I don't, it's actually the number of students. So I think this year we're at 713, last year we were at 7, I'm not positive about those numbers.
He's talking about the overall percentage.
You said it's
It is
actually-
lower, it's like 1%, but it's still lower than what it was last year.
And we're still looking at 70 as the benchmark, right? 70 is the
No,
benchmark.
PALS doesn't work that way. So PALS, the benchmark actually changes as the year goes on. So for example, in kindergarten, the benchmark was out of 104 student, the benchmark was at 28. So the students are given an assessment with different tasks, like how many letters do they know? What letter sounds do they know? Or what words can they spell? And then they're given points on all of those tasks. Those are added up to a summed score. And so with our DBA data, as Ms. Bay was saying, that we look at our DBA data with either proficient, needs improvement, or does not meet. So the 2nd through 11th grade, that is reading DBA data, and then the grade 8 at the very bottom is a writing DBA data. And when we look at our overall DBA data, we're very excited to see that there was growth in grades 4, 6, and 7 when you compare to last year from this year. And additionally, what we've analyzed our data to see is that when you look at 3rd graders who are now 4th graders, there was a 7% increase in those students on this assessment. And when we look from our 5th graders to 6th graders, there was, I think, about a 3% increase from that cohort of students, which we are really happy to see from that middle school transition from elementary to middle school. And then 6th grade to 7th grade, there was also an increase. And this was, we were actually concerned about our middle school assessment
because we added for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade paired passages, which is where the students receive 2 passages around the same topic, so they could have a fiction piece about the Holocaust and then a nonfiction piece about the Holocaust. They need to read both of those, and then they compare and analyze things within those passages. So on last year's test, we did not have a paired passage questions, and so I think that upped the level of rigor. So we were excited to see that the students actually, either in the case of 8th grade, stayed about the same. They were at 34% proficiency last year in 8th grade, so they went up 1%, but we were excited to see that that level stayed the same, and for 6th and 7th grade that it went up. Our concerns for the DBA data is 8th grade being at that 35% level, but then when you look at the 8th grade writing, the writing assessment is a shorter assessment. They don't have to do as much reading. We think the paired passages did impact 8th grade. And the other piece is that our 8th grade teachers are working, they have 2 SOLs that they're going to give at the end of this school year. So they're balancing both of those content. English is really 2 contents, so they're balancing that English and writing. And we think, and it's evident in the DBA score, that they probably are very focused on those writing pieces. And then for grade 11, we have found that there is a disconnect between our district benchmarks, and I think you'll hear it from my colleagues here as well in their subjects, between the district benchmarks for end of course, which is 11th grade, and then with the SOL pass rate. So our SOL scores for 11th grade are at 87% last year in reading, which is an all-time high over the last 5 years. And so you can see that we're at a 16% proficiency rating. So we are looking at ways to work with schools and teachers to make sure, one, that our students take our DBAs seriously. Is there an incentive tied to with grading, and making sure that our teachers also have buy-in and that they serve on committees to help us vet our assessments as well and make sure that they're aligned. And so what are the trends and implications of these results? So one of the things that, we're really excited to see, one, that cohort growth, so that our students are growing from 3rd to 4th and 5th to 6th and 6th to 7th. And then the other piece is that if you look at grades 3 through 7, almost 3rd grade through 7th grade, if you add our proficiency and our needs improvement, it is over 70%, and that's something that we talk to the schools about, is making sure that we can get those students that are at that needs improvement up to proficient. And that, we believe that the implication of that is our emphasis that we've had on the stages of literacy development and making sure that we're filling in cracks of things that our students are missing when it comes to literacy. So fluency and decoding and reading more, making sure that our non-negotiables are in place. So for example, Read 14.2 has been a big push for us. This year. It is now a non-negotiable. Our students are reading more. Independent reading is in place. We are working with administrators and reading specialists and department chairs to make sure that we are, that they're monitoring those non-negotiables. And a little side data that I just got from our media center is that our circulation in our media centers is up 10,000 checkouts this year from last year, and I think that's pretty powerful. I think it's that our schools are really trying to build communities of readers, and so I feel like that is having an impact on our growth. The other strength that we have is that we have what we call, when we analyze data in the English office at the district level, we look 2nd grade through that 11th grade and start to see what trends we're noticing within the data. And we noticed that what we called our big 3 last year, context, clues, main idea, and drawing conclusions, have all shown great strengths this year across 2nd through 11th grade. And we believe this is because we called them the big 3 last year. We did a lot of staff development on those, a lot of resources for our teachers. We provided resources and lessons for them, and we know that we need to replicate that to impact Tier 1 instruction with our areas of improvement improvement as well. So as far as where our improvement is, it's that PALS data. We've got to build reading proficiency. Our second graders need to walk into third grade classrooms prepared and ready to read on grade level. And so we have a lot of work to do in K2 to make sure that that happens. And then we've done item analysis and come up with what are our big ideas now of where we're seeing areas of weakness, and it's with summarizing and plot structure and then character analysis and development, and then back to that paired passage piece. We know that we have to prepare our students to be able to pair passages, read two pieces of text. That's what we do authentically as we read things. You all were talking about it today, an article in the newspaper that goes along with a chart that you're reading, and so we're trying to make sure that our students have opportunities to do that more than on an assessment. And so what are English Office next steps? They're focusing around those three areas. So phonological awareness, the strands that were weak, and then comparing and contrasting multiple text and that reading stamina. So we are working to build resources for teachers around emergent and beginning readers, because that is where the PALS piece is falling apart, is our teachers need systematic phonics instruction. We have worked to build scripted lessons for them around phonics instruction. Our guided reading lesson plan templates are much more user-friendly with more information on them to assist our teachers as well. We're also building the capacity of our literacy leaders by we have reading specialists and first grade teachers that are working in a letters course that is on systematic phonics instruction, along with just making sure that we have those resources. And then as far as our item analysis with the strands that were weak, we're going to replicate what we did last year, because that is showing us that that was actually working. So providing in-depth professional development for teachers on the rigor of our standards, where we unwrap them. What does that look like in the classroom? Mr. Brady told you about the professional development we did with principals last month. I just did that same professional development with our reading specialists and our department chairs, so they can then take that professional development to teachers and show them what that looks like. We have implemented what's communities of practice, where our teachers are really digging into the curriculum and seeing what does that look like in my classroom, and what things should I be doing to impact change. And then finally, we're going to make sure that we provide ways for our students to engage in text, in longer, more complex text that they're reading on a daily basis, and working with the other three core. I think that we're able to do that because we can talk about things for them to read in history and science and math. That being said, any questions or
Questions? You want to do questions?
we have any questions?
Yes, sure.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Basine, Ms. Campson.
Thank you for that presentation. I have a couple of questions. So first, can you describe, so I had a question about the number of students that took the DBA and the PALS. Did all of the students in those grade levels take those tests? Okay, and then I guess I just thought. So I think if I heard correctly, you mentioned that you're going to continue to do what you did last year.
With those big three strands that we said showed improvement in strengths for this year, we're going to do that now with the strands that just showed us weaknesses and concerns for this DBA.
Okay.
Yep.
And with that, you were going to apply different strategies, or I guess how do we know that we're moving along to show improved results in
So
those
we have
other areas?
there's a couple ways that we can do that. One is any students that are in intervention should be progress monitored. And so that's something that we work closely with our principals. So Monday we met with, I think, 11 principals and dug deep into their data with this. and how do you progress monitor your students? And so that is one way that they can check to see is, are we making progress with the standards that are there? And English is hard because we have a lot of things going on here. You've got reading proficiency, and so then you have the standards as well. So sometimes we have to go back to that reading proficiency and those foundational skills before we can get to some of the standards.
Okay. And do you look at, I have two more related questions. So do you look at where they are they reading on grade level and how that correlates to their DBA results?
Definitely.
Okay. And is that something that you feel is useful for the school board to look at? Because I think that impacts, reading, science, math. I mean, it impacts all the subject areas.
So one of the things that I've been doing with the principals is not only am I looking at their DBA data, but I'm looking at the STAR data side by side.
Okay.
And so we take the STAR data and, what principals we start to notice is that this school, they're at a 58% reading proficiency on STAR, and then the principal gets their DBA back, and they're at 37% proficiency on the DBA, and that, sends those red flags out, like, oh no, what's going on? And that's where we can have the conversation of, okay, STAR is a much quicker assessment. It's timed. The students have roughly about 35 minutes to take a STAR assessment, but it does give you that reading proficiency information that you need. And then when you compare that to the DBA, it's a much longer test. Students are required to read longer, more complex passages on grade level, and there's a disconnect and they're falling apart. And so that's where we've really tried to increase independent reading so that our students have stamina. Stamina to be able to sit and read 4 to 5 passages and answer questions and justify your answers or annotate the text as you're going, the same way with the first passage as you're going to do with passage number 5, and be able to do that. Those are the types of things that we're making sure our teachers are providing those opportunities for students. And at the Communities in Practice for our middle school teachers, walking them through a lesson to show them how you can chunk a text for them, model your thinking in part of the text, but then turn that over to them to force them into working their way through that text on their own. Sometimes we make the assumption that if a student is unable to read, that we don't want to put that complex text in front of them, and we want to make sure that we still do that.
Ms. Pacini, was that all? Were those all the questions you had?
Yeah.
Okay, because I want to make sure that we get to everyone's question with the time that we have. Ms. Campson.
First of all, thank you.
You're welcome.
I've been asking for what actions are you taking, and you gave me very clearly your areas of strength, your areas that you need improvement, and then you very clearly listed your next steps. That's exactly what I think the board wanted to know is, what are you doing? What are you doing to address the problems? And I know I kind of beat you up a couple times over it, and so I really appreciate that I see it here. Thank you. My question that I have, and this is not any news to me, is the disconnect between SOL and DBAs. That's not new. We've always had it. So at this point, and here we do, we're still looking at it. Decades later, we're still looking at that disconnect. Is there anything to look at how valid is the DBA if we're using it as a predictor or a way to identify where we need to work to get ready for the SOLs? And so, where are we with that? And this, I know it's not, it was there before any of us, it was there before you came on board, but what's happening, and maybe that's something even Ms. Wynn could address, is the disconnect there, because it's long time here, and it continues to be a big disconnect.
I think it may be also by subject. For mathematics, for example.
Math was always the biggest disconnect, and I assume it still is.
The DBA, actually, this quarter 1 DBA, that the data that we will look at will be on specific standards that is only one part of the SOL test. So you can't look at your quarter 1 DBA and use that as a predictor for how your students will fare on the SOL test, because that's cumulative.
Could I just say one thing on that?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're addressing if you're really sticking to just looking and testing Q1 curriculum, rather than dropping back and looking at what they missed in third grade and putting some of that in, which was always a problem, or looking forward and looking at it like a pretest by pre-testing them, are you now just testing what happens in Q1?
Yes.
And if you do, then it does give you a true reflection of how those Q1 items have been mastered to be tested on the SOL.
Yes.
So I think that there's still a validity problem there, because, you know, you're testing what you taught, they're going to miss it on the SOL too. And yet, in other words, the disconnect's there.
So then when we look at how they performed on those, then we adjust our support and our instruction.
Yeah, which is, yeah, that would be your action. And once again, appreciate being told what those actions are. Very nice job.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking she might be the person to ask about the disconnect.
Sure. It may look like a disconnect, but just to reiterate what we've been saying, the Q1 or Q2, Q3 DBAs or even our mocks, but I'll hold that to the end. But they're only designed to look at the particular standards or objectives that were covered during that particular time. And as we mentioned, the DBAs have two functions. They're formative in nature, but they're also sort of summative, but mostly formative in letting our teachers know, you know, did I teach that the way that it's supposed to be? So it's helping us to figure out what resources do central admin need to go and provide. But I, as a teacher, is it something going on teacher-wise, grade level-wise, or school-wide, or even district-wide? So it provides that level of support or information so that we can allocate our resources strategically. As far as a prediction, it cannot and it should not be used just strictly on predictive value for SOL performance, because it is only covering that particular point in time. It's meant to provide more formative information for them. There is going to be some disconnect because, as Gwen had pointed out with end of course English 11, usually we'll see an end result where our district is doing well for English 11, but a lot of the students were not taking the assessment very seriously. And so, sorry, for the Q1 results, it looked like, I forget, it was like 16% proficient in the number of students who were needs improvement. So we are working with high school, really our older students and teachers, to see what they can see the value of the DBA if they were to take it more seriously, how we could help them address instructional needs and instructional pathways for those particular students. Once we get the Q1 and Q2 information, then we can start putting them side by side along with STAR, which does have a predictive value, but STAR runs on trend information. And that's really important. We try to remind the schools that because STAR runs on trend information for predictive value, they should not be running STAR and only using that for a predictive value at the beginning of the year. We try to wait. As we always say, we want to triangulate your data, look at what's going on Q1 DBA, Q2 DBA, STAR fall screening, STAR winter screening, and draw a better, probably a clearer picture of what's happening for a particular student, classroom, grade level, school, and overall for our district.
Well, and STAR is really to allow you to measure improvement and effectiveness of your instruction, because the children are supposed to be showing growth. That's why it's a universal screen, so you can see how much they grow from September to January, and therefore how effective is your instruction in reading and math, because if you're not getting a half year's growth in a half year's time, so it's more way to evaluate instruction too.
Yes, to some degree, and also what it does is it helps to inform us of any prerequisites that may have been missed. So what we have been trying to do, and with curriculum instruction support as well, is helping teachers to use that STAR data along with the DBAs. DBAs will tell you what standards were missed, but STAR will tell you why that student is probably missing that. So Rhonda can give her math test, which is beautifully done, but if the student still doesn't understand integers, they're never going to get a particular standard. They're not going to master that. So that's the beauty of what STAR can do, but that's why we want them to utilize both types of data reports, because the teacher could reteach that same standard over and over again, but if that student has not met those prerequisites and there are still gaps in their knowledge and skill base, it's going to be a very difficult uphill battle for both the teacher and the student.
So I know Ms. Martin had a question.
Yeah, when I looked at this data the other day, I was appalled at these rates of needs improvement and does not meet the standard. And I know so DBA doesn't align with SOLs, right? Is that what we keep talking about, right? What about this 11th grade? And you said they're not taking it seriously, but 16% are proficient. I mean, so you're saying like 84% roughly are not taking this
And just to be
seriously?
Seriously. If you look at past data from previous years, it's about the same. And then you look at the SOL results, and our children do 80+%.
So what do you do in their senior year? How do you prepare them? How do you know how to prepare them for graduation and if they can't sit through 4 passages and answer questions, then if they go into the job, they're not going to be able to sit through 4 emails and answer those, or go on to college and sit through a 2-hour lecture.
So one of the tests that they have to pass for graduation is this 11th grade SOL. And so when your graduation is on the line, you're going to take it seriously and you're going to pass the test, which most of our children do. And what we've been challenged with for years and years and years, and I think Letitia Wade Jenkins will even speak to this, finding a way to ensure that our children take the test seriously at the high school level. Again, it appears that they don't perform well on the DBA, but when they take that SOL test, they do fine in the mid-80s, higher 80s. And so this year what we've done is we've tried to add a motivational piece to it. We have allowed teachers to use it as to substitute it for a failing test grade or a quiz grade. Again, we're leaving that to the teacher's discretion, just so we can get the children to take this assessment a little more seriously. This isn't a new challenge for us. It's been a challenge for years and years, and we've all been brainstorming around this about how we can get our 11th graders to take this test more seriously.
It seems like if and again, I'm assuming that if the teachers took it seriously, that they would take it seriously, but you're saying
we have to get teacher buy-in too.
Use it a grade,
Yeah.
use it as a grade.
Well,
yeah,
that's
and
an old
there's
debate.
Yeah,
An old debate.
yeah, right,
An old
right.
debate.
So that,
But
yeah,
also,
it's philosophical review.
these grade 2 and 3, I mean, these are terrible.
So I think that in looking at this document, that again, what are we trying to do here as a board? We're trying to use this information to help our decision making, whether that be through policy, whether that be through budget, whether that be through recommendations that come from the administration. And so one thing that I'd like to do is, again, reiterate the thanks to the administration for this presentation and the data that you've assembled here. What I think might also be beneficial is marrying this information with our accountability plan to put where our benchmark is. If we have a benchmark that looks at PALS, where that could be, are we, like a little dotted line or something, so that we can say, okay, well, this is where we are now, but this is what our goal is, so that we can constantly be reminding of how we are striving for excellence, because that's what we're here to do. That we always want to be moving in a forward direction. And so I would say that would help to get us to, we see the yellows, we see the reds, we want to make it green. And we see that with these strengths and areas for improvement, that's where you're working to do this. Let me go on to my question.
I just still had one more thing to say.
Sorry, go
when
ahead.
you're talking about improvement at 1%, that is not statistically significant improvement. And so if you want to communicate this information to me in the future, I need to know that to me is flat. So I don't see that as an improvement. Okay, so I just want to know, because it's confusing to me when I hear improvement and then I ask the next question and I go, oh, well, that's not really improvement. So just want to let you know.
So in going back,
Before your conclusion, I share the same concern that Ms. Martin has, and I do appreciate every bit of work that went into this presentation. I have a question about first and second, and I know that they're separate groups of children, but how does the curriculum change from first grade to second grade that would generate this type of differential when at this grade, they don't know how to not take something seriously? That grade, in my mind, pretty much just follows instructions. So I'm thinking that there's a change in curriculum that more is probably required of them at this level than at the first grade level. So there's something in that transition, hopefully, that's causing this big gap. And how does that come over to the areas of improvement and all that? There was something else I was going to say to that. Yeah, and how does that translate over? Because I didn't see that piece in the results and how we're going to move forward, the trends and implications.
Well, it definitely does impact. So I think even if you look at the PALS data where in second grade, 32% of our second graders are needs improvement or below benchmark in PALS, and then you look at the DBA next to that, it's very close to that. The number of needs improvement, it's at 34%. That it might be flat, but it's very close to each other, those data points. So in first grade to the beginning of you are learning how to read. I mean, you start first grade with reading one line of text, and you end first grade with reading multiple lines of text where there's much more to read. And so that's the piece that we know. We believe that one piece that's missing, and it's training teachers and making sure that they have the resources, is phonics and phonological awareness, and that students are able to decode, that they're fluent, and that we're focusing on those things in first grade. That's one of the reasons why we have this letters training. So I think when you're saying, does the curriculum change in the English curriculum, as a reader, it's that you're becoming a reader. You're becoming a strong reader to then enter into second grade where you're able to read longer text with less support, like pictures and things like that.
So with 82% in PALS reading fairly above the benchmark, meeting or exceeding the benchmark, I would think that they have the phonics down, and when they get into second grade, we would see a similar trend in the second grade. Or is it as a district that what we need to do is put, how do I want to say this? Increase the expectations, the level of expectation for the first graders in preparation for second grade. Does that make sense?
It does, and we actually did that.
Okay.
And so, and I'll explain why we did that 4 years ago. We raised, and it was exactly what you're thinking. Let's raise the bar a little bit for our first graders, so when they get to second grade, and what we're finding is we still have that barrier with our students not becoming necessarily fluent reading, and it goes back to phonics and a system. So let me just, but you do need to understand there. So PALS is a literacy screener. So it is a screener to find the students that are at high risk for literacy intervention. And so that's the difference here with, if you then start to equate it a little bit to DBA, because they're so different. So from first grade, the first grade PALS is given in the second week of school, third week of school in September. It includes letters and letter sounds, because as a first grade teacher, I need to know if my students know those, and that's how we're gonna find those first graders that have literacy deficiencies. By the end of first grade, those are all taken away. And you're reading a list, and you're having to do a 25-word spelling assessment, and that's a change for our students. It's much more intense, and the expectations are higher, and so that's why we see this. We see the same disconnect when you look at beginning first grade PALS and end of first grade PALS, and we know that it's a concern And we are really working to try to provide our teachers the tools to understand how to remediate those deficits and intervene. We are working with our Title I teachers to work with those students that are at those beginning and emergent reader levels, because there's a lot to what they need to be doing with those
So,
students.
Ms. Collins, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're short on time right now with this presentation that we have, and we definitely want to make sure that we get to our principal guests that are with us tonight. The question that I had, and then we'll transition over to the next one, was with the scores that we have for PALS, if you dial that, or if you drill down to schools that have the need, specifically with regards to preschool, are you seeing anything that the board can do or recommendations that might come forward with regards to offering more preschool, offering more opportunities to students either via mixed income preschool, so that way we have more students that are meeting at least the PALS, so that when they start kindergarten, first grade, that they are better prepared? Has anything come to light on that with these screening tools that you
Well,
have?
usually the students that are in preschool are not the ones that are in
Okay.
the red.
So that's a
Right.
that's a clear indicator. So the more students that we could capture into preschool, they will be better prepared. Okay.
And it really is the foundation of our school system when it comes to reading, is
Got it.
this K-2 piece.
Okay.
Dr.
Okay.
Gabriel, is it possible that we take this and use it as a 2x2 session for the school board members, so that we could have more time with the staff,
Absolutely.
understanding this and understanding how, well, the
idea.
impact. Mhm.
Sure. It's up to Dr. Birdsong. Yep. Okay. Dr. Birdsong, how do you want to proceed from this
So
point?
if we're gonna have 2x2s, unless you object to this, we can, not that everyone's time is not valuable, but I would really like you to hear voices from the field. And so we can invite our content coordinators to the 2x2 meetings with you, and at that time, they can go more in depth into the data. Would that be acceptable to you?
It would.
Okay. All right, so thank you so much, and we do appreciate your time, and we'll be scheduling our 2x2s with you. And so I'm going to ask our illustrious principals to come forward. Thank you again. They were very, very excited to present today, I have to tell you, seriously.
We appreciate them coming out tonight.
Yes, because you know, their time is very valuable, and like everyone else's, but they work really hard. So we appreciate that.
They want to
Here, give me water.
Oh, so so each of the principals have a different instructional focus at their schools. And so they wanted to utilize this opportunity to tell you a little bit about their data-driven decision-making and what instruction looks like in their building, how they are supporting their instructional focus, and support from central office staff. So we asked, again, an elementary, middle, and a high school principal to be here, and we're very pleased to present them to you because they have done an outstanding job with data analysis and making sure that their kids get what they need to be successful in the classroom. So we're going to start with Dr. Balthazar, Principal, Ingleside Elementary School.
Thank you. Greetings, Dr. Birdsong.
Right, I'm with you.
Nervous. Dr. Gabriel and members of the board. I bring you greetings from Ingleside Elementary, proud principal of Tigerville, USA. Our instructional focus, we focus on questioning, visualization, and drawing conclusions in all content areas. We have a strong focus on content integration. We take the big three, and in every area, we use the critical thinking skills of questioning, visualizing, and drawing conclusions in every content area. We're very intentional and strategic because we utilize all supports to ensure that our scholars, students, and staff members are supported. We have actually taken probably the innovation gear on the theory of action to another level, because as the leader, it's my responsibility to ensure that I provide support, I monitor, and I observe measurable outcomes for my students and teachers. So at central office, they tend to call me probably the squeaky gear, because I am always on the phone. I need help. Where are we here? Can someone come out? And I think that is our job as instructional leaders, to show our teachers that they are supported by experts in our division. So just basically what I would like to do is just give a little snapshot of just a few innovative things that each content department has done for Ingleside Elementary. In social studies, just to highlight a few, Ms. Mitchell meets with our grade levels for quarterly planning. She provides the curriculum updates, resources, and any new updates from VDOE. She heavily supports our 5th grade team after each DBA. We're actually going to implement a new program called the Voyage Review, and that basically is a team effort where we include our 5th grade teachers, Ms. Mitchell, my media specialist, her background was in social studies at the high school level, and the entire team, 2 of which the teachers are brand new to the grade level and to teaching in general. So you have to really wrap around those supports from central and within the schoolhouse. So we're implementing that this Friday, just looking at our data analysis and going around with passports, stamping each student's passport based on the skills that they missed on the first quarter DBA in history. So we're excited. If anyone wants to stop by on Friday, just let us know. We welcome you to see that. Science, we love science. Ingleside actually went from a Tier 3 school last year to a Tier 1 school in science. We really tugged on Ms. Bickham and Ms. Britton. My teachers attended the monthly science meetings. They continue to come out and to help us support instruction in the areas that we missed based on data. And so what I've done with our funding is started with my after-school program for 5th grade. I exclusively use those funds for 5th grade students, and we start early, and that has been phenomenal because we know we have to have those hands-on lab experiences. And so my 5th grade scholars, it's almost like an extended day model. We kind of make them think they stay longer. It's really helped move us from Tier 3 to Tier 1, and I really thank the team for coming out helping to brainstorm with that. We tie in heavily content passages, as we've talked about stamina and rigor. We integrate that right into the lab with actual hands-on experiences. So we're excited about that moving up. Our 4th graders also now what we've done is we've have the curriculum and instruction department come out as well with a 90-minute double block of planning with 4th grade and 5th grade teachers, where the 5th grade teachers are allowed to look at the 4th grade skills that were missed because they're tested on those in 5th grade. And so it's really built a community of science in our building, and you see the evidence of it in our data. So we're excited about that. We moved from this last DBA, we were, I think, ranked number 2 in the district, and our 4th graders fell within the Tier 1 range. So we started it last year, and we're keeping it going this year with an extra oomph of fire under that. So thank you to the science department. My next one is my new baby here, special ed. I am thankful for the special ed department because, as we know, the research shows that 47% of the state right now is in red and SPED. And so we know what our district data shows in the area of special education. So we sat back and we brainstormed and we said, duh, right in front of our face. Special ed teachers in the universities and the colleges focus on compliance and policy. So we're like, why can't we move our scholars to why are SPED students not moving? So what we've decided to do at Ingleside, we started last year with just models of collaboration with the SPED teacher specialists coming out, meeting with the general ed and the inclusion teachers, building capacity. We moved, closed gaps, made great gains. However, we said there's still something missing. So we had Denise Thomas come out. What we do now, once a month, we have the special ed teacher specialists along with our reading specialists, And so they're training our SPED teachers in content, reading strategies in Tier 1, which is an overflow that will hit all of the subject areas. So we're really excited about that professional development. So if you'd like to come and see that, you can come see that once a month. Just let us know. That's really helping us with that SPED gap. New department they have, not for many years, but the response to intervention department. The engagement specialist supports us, Wendy Burke. What she did is she sent out an email, asked teachers to join. I didn't force it on them. We give them enough professional development and things that that are non-negotiables and mandates alone. So she sent it out voluntarily to the teachers. If you would like to attend one monthly session with classroom management strategies and engagement, and I will come in and monitor your feedback and the strategy that you learn. She comes out once, twice a month with that, and the teachers have opted to come in even a little bit before time because they're really excited about just having that extra level of support. And so we really feel that that's really helped build the teachers' Tier 1 capacity as well, and help with classroom management because they're learning engagement strategies to use during instruction. So that's our new baby that we started this year with RTI. Math, where is Rhonda? I call her Wonder Woman. Because in math, I have a brand new math specialist, but at Ingleside, our teachers are seasoned there. And, sometimes with seasoned teachers, we really need to, level up. That's our theme, level up 2.0 this year at Ingleside. So with math, Rhonda has even an additional support that comes out, but I'm really impressed by the fact that during their department, they have an additional monthly professional development specifically for new math specialists in a time where they get together, discuss data, research, and so it's really built the self-esteem of a new teacher that's a new math specialist, out there, in the trenches, and that's helped. But what we've also added in the area of math is the ITRT department. Every grade level planning, twice a month, the first 15 minutes of the planning session is dedicated to the ITRT, Ms. Bermudez. She meets with every teacher during grade level planning to teach the latest technology, strategies, interventions, and programs, and that's really helped to increase engagement just by having all of that under one umbrella. So thank you, math department, as well as the ITRT department. And our favorite, and so last year, as a result, our math scores, we kept that going. We were in the 90%, we scored in the 90s in math as a result. Reading, if you got to the slide, I believe you saw about that PALS in grade 2. We needed a plan for those third graders that would be there. So what we've started is the English office, they train the reading specialists. The reading specialists then in turn come back and train, Title I teachers or the grade level teachers. So what we did was we got creative with funding, and I instituted a little group of paraeducators with funding. I hired 3, and they're called PALS Divas. And I call them divas because they are little cute petite college students from Old Dominion and Norfolk State University, and they walk around with their cart, but we have one assigned to every grade level, and they are being trained what is being taught through the English department, a reading specialist, then she trains the PALS Divas, and we really saw an ultimate increase in our third grade reading scores. This is our second year with PALS Divas. So we're just really excited about that. And we know we're growing one quarter at a time, and we celebrate at Ingleside because morale matters.
Yeah.
The departments have all helped us to keep our gears well-oiled, and we're just excited, and all of you are to be commended. So I wanted to just take my time to share the innovative supports, the vision as a principal that I have, and how they have come in to help do the train-the-trainer model in all content areas. So,
I feel like I need to
thank
clap.
you.
We take questions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's great. So I'm really interested in the how you're working to close the special education gap, because it's not a surprise when we look at any of our numbers there. But what you identified, you were talking about, that was just being policy, what we're following, and then you're taking this innovative approach. Are we at the district level looking at what you're doing and looking, so we're intentional about it, to see at the end of the year, has it made a difference so that if it is something that is working, that we can implement it
Replicate, right.
Right.
and replicate it.
One thing I can honestly say about the elementary principals, we are very collaborative and we're very close. A lot of the ideas I got from Lindenwood about hiring, using funding instead of funding a highly salaried Title I teacher, hire 3 highly qualified college students with degrees and train them. So a lot of us are moving towards that. So I bet if you did poll some of the schools, I believe it will show that some are doing that as well. If not, our doors are welcome. You know my line, come on over. We're willing to share.
Yeah, I'm just really interested to see if it gives us the gain that we're looking for, and and so I just want to make some type of note that we look for that at some point at the end of the year.
Definitely.
Shine a light on the,
Yeah.
Sure.
And I mean,
bright
everything else was
spots and some
great, but
people
that
over
one
there
just
to learn
kind of
from 'em.
piqued it at me.
Something we've not always
Just
done
the
so
need,
well.
and I didn't realize it, being in, 15 years now as an administrator, why are we still beating the same dead horse? And I'm like, what is it? And so when you go in and observe that they're more focused on minutes, and I'm only assigned to one grade level, and I'm short-staffed, a para here, para there, and it all boiled down to the content knowledge that really isn't given in the educational programs.
And something else we've done this year, Dr. James Mitchell and her team, they're required to attend every principal's meeting and provide some professional development. And the inclusion model we know needs a lot of work, and so they've been able to provide some strategies to building principals in that area. So I think just having that team in front of the principals every month, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it makes a difference.
Definitely.
Jordan?
So I know that each of you all are big on culture and climate, so when it gets your turn, you can speak to that. But Dr. B, can you just talk about what you do to keep your staff morale high and how you engage families in the community as part of that morale boost?
Definitely. Again, we have to promote or put our schools out there. So first, we're big on Twitter, Facebook page. The ILT Focus, we send a newsletter out with every report card that goes home with what's happening in the schools and where we are with data. We're transparent about it. This is where we are. They saw the slides of data of where we, just what you would see by individual schools. Our parents see it because we need their support. But as a leader, what I've realized, I can have the vision of what I want done, but if I don't have the buy-in from the teachers, then I'm just alone. So what I do is the Strength Finders assessment on every single teacher in my building. And I use that to determine who to pair with based on the personalities. I've also done every early release day or pre-service week, I facilitate all PD and team building. So I've done different personality assessments. Just last early release, we did a generational activity where we identified the baby boomers on staff, the veterans on staff, the millennials, and then we talked about how you communicate with this person on your team. So I think it's just a matter of knowing the players on your team, who to pair them with. But as a leader, what really matters to me is knowing that top strength of who I can empower. And then when I go to approach that teacher, if I'm dealing with a person that is an achiever, they want me to be bright, be brief, be gone, get out my face. But if I'm dealing with someone like me, my top strength is communication. It just means I tell the story behind the story. And sometimes they're like, really? Get to the point. So I know when I approach a person with that top strength. So I almost feel like, and another one of my strengths is my personal strength is individualization. So I have candid relationships with different staff members, and I use all of those to pair up the team. And it's funny, we'll sit in a team meeting and they'll go, oh, she's a thinker, you're the doer, you're the influencer. So all of those, it's a common language amongst the staff. And I've been doing that since being an administrator, and our climate survey results show that really knowing your players really helps keep the team together. Can't make them all happy. If you make everybody happy, something's wrong. So it can come out when necessary. But I do know I go back and reflect on how to approach the different members on my team, and they all know the strengths of the other team members in the school.
Okay.
Thank you very much. All right. So when we started here, I think a lot of this is cyclical in nature. So I'm going to try to wrap it all around. You know, our focus is communicating comprehension and literature in every class. So we really want to focus on that comprehension. And, you know, I've had the privilege now of working in 2 incredible buildings in Norfolk with just great teachers and great teacher leaders. So one of the things that we started with was really when I made that switch over to Blair, Dr. Cataldo had invited us and a team over to an equity conference in Region 2. And that really started to drive some of the conversations at Blair Middle School, because we knew we had equity issues at Blair. And that team of teachers, I sat down with them. Again, I'm only a week in, but it really helped me build relationships with the folks and the leaders in my building to really understand what's going on. So they started off with a professional development back to school, and I'll share that with all of you because it's kind of a cool little word cloud here that we have in our building that we just kind of that we've passed out. But really what that is, yeah, and I'm going to show this to all of you. I brought some to you, nice little cardstock for you all. Even the stuff that talks about sandwiches, there's meaning behind that. It was a morning PD session, so they weren't hungry at that point. But there is some meaning to that. Even with the Waldo, we weren't looking for him, but there's pieces of that. And we then we built relationships, and literacy is going to equal our success. And we have hit home with that since day one I've been there. And through that conference that was set up through CNI, we then had to think a little bit differently. We're not Title I, so how do we pay for these things? And I know Student Support Services and Special Education have helped fund Jakari Taylor to come into my building 3 times. I'm trying to get him 2 more times to come in for that continual professional development, where he focuses on equity, focuses on what is cultural relevant pedagogy. And we just had our session on Monday, and I can tell you it's contentious. It's those courageous conversations we have, but as a leader, I love it because it does those one-on-one conversations we have with folks that may disagree or may not see the value in it. It's those things that then lead to growth, and we've seen a lot of those things happen. You know, so we have focused in, even with the climate and culture. I don't want to jump your question, yeah, we'll still get to that, but that climate and culture is so big to me to make sure that we're meeting the needs of every single child in our building. You know, so through that, we've now developed also, the ITRT has developed a common folder to where any time we have some type of cultural relevant lesson or activity, we drop it in there. For example, we had one of our 8th grade English teachers had Langston Hughes and Jakari Taylor juxtapose those together and do a compare and contrast, and he was amazed, but he just happened to show up. And he did the rap challenge and rapped to our kids one of his poems, and it was so meaningful. I had the video, but I didn't want to break that out because of confidentiality and some of those things, but it was really cool, and our kids loved it. And it's that meaningful, ongoing professional development again, and him being invested in my building. We've also focused in on smaller PD sessions. We don't do after-school meetings. We do all of our stuff as job embedded. So we make sure the first Monday of the month is set aside for professional development. We redo our schedule to make sure that coverage is set so that all teachers can be there. We include our support staff, our paraprofessionals, our deans, security. They all need to be in on these sessions because, again, it's really focused in on the relationship piece. As far as the literacy piece, we made it really simple. We brought some stuff over from Norvey that we worked on that had success, but keeping it simple. Vocabulary, academic vocabulary, using those words, utilizing the Freyer model exclusively, just making sure that kids understand that they can brainstorm, they can take different things, and then sharing those student work. And then obviously inspect what is inspected, inspect what we expect, and that is some of those non-negotiables that English had set up, that 14.2, making sure that that's happening in our classroom. And I've done joint walkthroughs with all of the folks in CNI. Ms. Collins and her team have been really, even after observations, where we've sat down, and even on, Thursday night, hey, I need you to come in, they're there to help out, to show this is where we need, because observations, sometimes we want to make sure that we have that even flow from my building to central office and back down to the teachers. So we've made sure that we've had those meetings to ensure that dialogue is going back and forth. And like they did say, a lot of our supports are differentiated. Not that we don't need Miss White, but our math is done historically pretty well. So we don't see her as much, but she's there, and she's done joint walkthroughs. Science, with the going away of some of the biology and some of the other things that have come through from the state, we have a little bit more concern, and Miss Britton came through, did walk through with my assistant principal. She's setting up a power training session for 3 hours with subs being provided through CNI to make sure that we're hitting those areas that we need to do to make sure that our kids are getting the hands-on learning experiences in the building and science. We also had, prior to the school year, we paired we have pods at Blair. It's a beautiful thing where we can really work with our kids sometimes on a smaller basis. We paired all of our English teachers with history teachers. So, we wanted to have some commonality. So if I'm a CoLab English teacher, I have a common pairing so those teachers know each other, know the kids. And just like Mr. Brady had said, how you can't tell the history lessons, I was hosting some of the potential deans for Old Dominion, and one of the dean candidates came in and she said, was that a history lesson or was that an English lesson? I was so proud of that. Like, it was so great to hear. But that's some of those things that we've been working on to have that shared vision of central office and bring that to the school level. Those primary source documents have been critical as well from history because they're reading, so they should be in there. So our history team has shared all of their performance-based assessments with English to try to get some of those common grading practices in place as well. We also have through classroom libraries where we've spent some of the SIG money through with efforts from Ms. Collins. And we've been able to really get almost $6,000 worth of books in all of our classrooms for each grade level, which has been awesome. And we've been able to identify text. Ronnie Sidney has also been to my school. He's written several graphic novels, and I brought him to my building. He actually did a community night for our students to talk about how he uses writing as his outlet. Life may not always be what we want it to be, but it was really well received. And we have several of his texts that we've provided to our staff and to students, and they've really welcomed those. Some of the things also that came out, through our staff statements, I want to capture some of their ideas as well, and these are all some of their things is what will we be at the end of this year? And they wanted to make sure that we communicate these things, that we will be an excellent school for all students, that we will find culturally appropriate reading material for all students. We will be fully accredited after the school year. We will make learning relevant and connect to our students. We will make a concerted effort to address our gap groups, and we will build a culture that welcomes and includes all students. So those are some of the things, because we do feel it's important that we tell our story as well. We are on Twitter. We are on Facebook. I know 2 of you have come in. We've also partnered with the community. Old Dominion has been critical in the success. They have sent me the teacher in residency program, where I have free extra adults in my building. So that's, we have aligned them to where they need to be. We have potential candidates, and I don't graduate for 2 or 3 years, but there's a math candidate in there, and best believe I'm keeping that number in my pocket, so when they graduate, they'll be having a contract for Norfolk. And I think, what does that mean? Because we are, we're accredited with conditions, and our area has been our SPED gap groups in English and math. And even after I worked first DBA, I was thrilled, and we even did, based on average scores and where we rank based on SOL benchmarks. And I'm so proud to say that we are the #1 middle school for reading and writing in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and in special education scores. So I was thrilled to announce that. And because I can never be happy, I had to go try to find something else to try to criticize my team with. But even with proficiency, we did so well. Our 7th grade, and I just want to give you, and I have some other pieces here, but our 7th grade SPED gap group, our 7th grade SPED was at 56% proficiency already. That is amazing because in my teacher's terms, the 6th grade was the one that kind of turned the school inside out last year. But there's so much more potential in that, and we've had that conversation about how, within that comes, and I'm just so proud to be part of that, efforts that 7th grade team has done. And again, with the proficiency, we were either at or above the Norfolk Public Schools, benchmark. But that is where I'm at, and I turn it over to you for some questions.
Thank you. Any questions in particular? Well, I just want to say that since I did have the opportunity to come and see how the cohorts worked with the English and the history together, I thought that was a really innovative idea, and I couldn't tell the difference. I mean, other than the fact that it would say, there's history items, on the class walls and whatnot, but it was really engaging of how the students were very interested in the lessons and how it looked like they were really trying to comprehend the material that was being delivered. So, great. Thank you.
Right. Well, good evening again, Dr. Birdsong, Dr. Gabriel, members of the board. I want to thank you all again for allowing me the opportunity to share about the great things that are taking place at Lake Taylor High School. The faculty and staff are fully committed to ensuring that we build upon the foundational work that we've put into place over the last 3 years to achieve full accreditation. And as a part of that process, we are focusing on 3 areas in our instructional focus that are essential to the school improvement process. Alignment of the written, taught, and tested curriculum, as well as student engagement, and the implementation of high-yield instructional strategies that focus on critical reading and thinking skills. With the alignment of the written, taught, and tested curriculum, we are intentional about ensuring that the teachers can clearly identify those concepts and skills that students need to know and do according to the VDOE curriculum framework to demonstrate mastery. As far as student engagement is concerned, we are making sure that students are active participants in the learning process. When we do our building-wide walkthroughs, we look for evidence of student learning, and we are also looking to make sure that they are active participants in that learning process. And with our implementation of critical thinking and reading strategies, we are focusing on using the CERN power tools, strategies, as well as vocabulary word attack and graphic organizers. As far as data analysis, in addition to looking at the data from unit and district benchmark assessments and what we call data think tank sessions, we are also focused on formative assessments that teachers are looking at how students are progressing with those concepts and skills on a weekly basis. Teachers are analyzing that student work to make instructional changes so that we can intervene quicker rather than waiting until a unit assessment or a district benchmark assessment is given to provide different action steps or a course of action to make sure that students understand what is taught. All of our meetings are PD sessions. However, this year we have taken a different approach where we have revised our staff development sessions to be more job embedded. Teachers come to those sessions with their curriculum standards completely unpacked, and in those sessions they are able to work with facilitators in order to plan activities, formative assessments that will be used actually in the lessons. We just started doing that. We've sent out survey data to our we sent out a survey to our teachers so that we can get feedback on ways that we can tweak that to better meet their needs. We are focused on enhancing the climate and the culture at Lake Taylor High School. Last year was my first year of implementing the Student Advisory Committee within Lake Taylor High School. We're continuing that this year, and the student representatives from the school board are working with our students to identify things that we need to change in Lake Taylor High School and action steps in order to do that. This year, I have also implemented a teacher advisory committee so that teachers as well can identify those things that we want to improve and come up with action steps for that. We're also working with Johnston's as far as rebranding Lake Taylor High School. We want to clearly define what it means to be a Titan, and we have a committee of teachers who are working with that. This year, we held commitment to graduate assemblies for all of our classes, where we let students know those support systems that we have in place, as well as the activities that we have planned for them. At the end of that session, all students signed a banner committing to graduate on their cohort year. For our freshmen, we actually made that as though it was a mock graduation where each student walked across the stage and shook my hand, and we gave them certificates. So we're very excited about those commitment to graduate ceremonies. We're also working to do a better job of telling our story. So again, I'm thankful for this opportunity. We're also using social media, Facebook, Twitter, as well as our website to make sure that that information is communicated. Within the building, we're doing what we call instructional focus an action email blast where anytime an administrator or department chair sees great things taking place that are aligned to our instructional focus, we share that with the whole school. And so teachers are also joining in as a part of that process. And so this year and every year, we're committed to making sure that the upward trend continues. And so in looking at our district benchmark data in comparison to last year and this year, we, in 10 out of the 14 areas tested, we saw growth, and we're very excited about it. And so we saw growth in all of science, all of the end of course classes, earth science, chemistry, and earth science, chemistry, and biology. In math, we saw growth in all of the 3 content areas, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, as well as geometry. We also saw an increase in geography, English 11, and government. And so I know that the district benchmark data is just one snapshot in time of how students are progressing. And also the benchmarks that we use in Norfolk are very different from the benchmarks that are used for the SOL assessment. It is one data point that we can use in addition to other data points to see how our students are progressing. And so I just want to publicly thank the students and the teachers at Lake Taylor High School for their commitment to teaching and learning, the teaching and learning process, and greater things lie ahead for the students and staff at Lake Taylor.
Awesome. Questions? One statement that I would like to make is a common thread that I have heard from you all and then from several of the principals that we have is that we have valuable partners that are with Norfolk Public Schools. I've heard Norfolk State, I've heard Old Dominion, I've heard Virginia Wesleyan. I mean, even at Richard Bowling Elementary, each one of their breakout rooms was sponsored by one of our colleges here. And I just cannot thank them enough on behalf of this board for the additional help that they provide to us, because those are resources that we can't even measure. And we were just talking about our budget. And so hearing from you all the wonderful things that they are doing to move the needle and help you do your job more effectively, which then translates to better student outcomes, is wonderful. So I love to hear that. And I know that other school divisions sometimes do resolutions of thanks to the universities. Maybe that's something that we can consider in the future. But thank you for sharing that information and for using and leveraging those partners to help students. Appreciate it. Dr. Birdsong, thank you for the work that went into this presentation. I do appreciate the idea that Ms. Smith brought up for the 2x2 sessions so we can better do deep dives and answer questions on the information that has been presented to us. And I do appreciate the voices from the field aspect of it. So I think it went very well.
So I would just ask board members to contact me directly if there are some dates and times that work better for you, so we can go ahead and schedule that sooner than later.
Okay.
2x2s?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So the next portion of our meeting is policy. So I would like for Ms. Martin and Ms. Basine to bring the board up to speed on where we are with certain policies that are before us and any further recommendations that you all have.
Okay. So I guess I'll go ahead and start. So the policy committee met on November 18th. It was a very short meeting. Unfortunately, there was a lot going on in this building that day. So we weren't able, I mean, we got some stuff done, but anyways, and Mr. Cloud was not able to be there as well, so it was a little limited. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if you look at your agenda, I'm just going to go policy by policy here as it's listed and work that way. So the first one is the family life education policy. At our previous meeting, when we talked about this, we talked about how the VSBA had removed the community involvement team obligation, and when we discussed this at the policy committee meeting, Mr. Mr. Persons had recommended that we continue that practice by using the SHAC committee, and then also adding an addition of other essential members per the state code. But additionally, this policy is actually being further revised by the Virginia Department of Education. So the recommendation from the policy committee is to adopt the VSBA change right now, temporarily, until we have more information on where VDOE is ultimately going to land with this policy. Did you want to go into any more detail about that?
Just the additional, the only other details I think that we talked about, that Mr. Person talked about, was just how having some type of committee that can kind
administrative, from the administration, correct, yeah.
Being able to kind of go through and vet what are some potential changes in family life, and just make sure that we are always very transparent with any kind of changes and get lots of stakeholder input. So I think the SHAC meeting was, or that current already set up structure was going to be very important to make sure that we do that as well.
So essentially, at our business meeting, we still haven't adopted this policy per the changes that the VSBA made.
So it wasn't in
February or
2019, May?
Yeah, so we're just going to adopt this, be current, knowing that some changes will be coming
So
down the
this
line.
policy needs to be on our business meeting
Agenda.
Under the
Yes.
consent agenda. Unless, is there anyone that has questions or concerns or discussion points about this? When we say advisory committee, are we saying the SHAC committee, or are we saying a committee of within Norfolk Public Schools administrators? Or
There's two committees. So there was a community involvement team that was required under the Family Life Education policy. VSBA has they've removed that requirement. If we want to continue that as a best practice, and we don't have to, but if we choose to do so, and again, we don't, the recommendation is that we do, then what we get to determine what that looks like. And at this time, Mr. Persons had recommended that we use the resources that are currently established, with the addition, like I said, of other essential personnel that would be required to serve in the capacity of SHAC and community involvement team. Again, that they're still formulating a formal recommendation, so we don't really need to go into the details about that at this time. But on the 18th, we'd like to just go ahead and at the baseline accept the change that does not include the community involvement team until we can come back to the table with a more firm determination of what that would be.
Ms. Basine?
And to add to that, and I don't know if Ms. Martin already mentioned this, but the Virginia Department of Education has put together a task force too to look at this. I don't know if, I'm sorry, I stepped out of the room. So based on those recommendations, Mr. Persons will come back and share what those results are. But that's going to take some time, which is...
Okay. All right. Next item.
Okay. So moving on to the suicide prevention and postvention policy, there was some, at the last meeting, there was some school board meeting, there was some questions about the language that was in the policy as presented. So we talked about this at the policy committee meeting, and the recommendation is to adopt the VSBA version. This was another one that was hung over from the VSBA changes. But then there are some additions which are on the red line version of Section 4, keep Section 5, and also adopt Section 7. There were some minor changes, such as I had recommended for consistency to change parent to parent guardian, things like that. But this is will be, with these changes, we would adopt this policy as a Norfolk-specific policy, and so there would be a Z added to that.
Okay.
you have anything else to add?
Yep, nope, that was great.
And is that for the 18th voting also?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Was that actually voted on in September?
No.
No, okay.
The next
It was
one.
up for September, but then I think we had moved it because it had some
September date on here.
information
I was just
in.
confused by that.
The special school board, call for special school board meetings. Now, this one comes from Mr. Clanton. And so what we wanted to do is provide, because it went from board meeting to policy meeting, that we wanted to provide Mr. Clanton an opportunity to explain his standing on why he thinks that we should, why we should review this for consideration for vote.
All right, appreciate it, thank you. The state code calls and gives us, the state code gives us standing as to how we call special call meetings. It lists that the board chair can call it, and it leaves it up to the local school board to determine what that number is. The board, the last time that this actual policy was revised was October 18th of 2017. And the proposal that I sent in was to change it from 2 members to 4 members. And my reasoning behind that is simply this, that the board chair can call a special meeting, but then I really feel like that it should be the majority or the will of the board whether or not you have a special call meeting outside of that, because in all rationale, if there's a special call meeting that needs to be called, you should be working through the chair. And the other piece of that is that if you work through the chair and the policies that we already have in place, which is through agenda planning, which allows items to be added onto the agenda, that there shouldn't be a need for calling in all the board members outside of that. Because you can get into a situation where, because the policy also states to try to make every effort that every board member can be there. And as we already look at the number of meetings that we have, that I think that we should really be putting every effort to be working through the board chair and through the established policies that are in place regarding how items are placed on the agenda, and so that we can bring them up. And so changing it from 2 also moves it from a minority standing to what the will of the board should be, because if you're going to go outside of the chair for which the board has elected, then it should not be 2 members, but it should really be defined that it's a majority. Just like if we were in Robert Rules of Order, which we've already identified as our standing governance policy for parliamentary authority, it would be considered it would be considered what we call an appeal or an overriding of the chair. But if you don't go through the chair to actually put that in there to say this is why we need to have a special call meeting, then we run into situations where 2 members may call us in, and we have to be obliged by that. And I think that really if we're communicating as a board, and this is really in an effort to ensure that we're communicating more as a board, and that if we're exhausted all of the items that we have in place already in policy, then we can have 4 members. And if that means that we're talking amongst ourselves and that there truly is a need to go outside of the chair to go and call a special meeting, and that's having 4 people, and that could be anywhere, but we have to start talking more as a board and not just calling special call meetings.
Comment? Well, I don't disagree with you in terms of the communication process. I don't see any reason to change the policy if the goal is for us to communicate better as a board. Then I think we should work on communicating better as a board. I don't think we need to change the policy in order to get there. Part of the challenge has been is getting items on the agenda and understanding what that process is. We're working right now still on trying to solidify as a board, what our process is in doing such things, such as getting items on the agenda. The special call meeting should be rare. Prior to this board forming, there have been other instances where special meetings have been called by members of the board just based upon need and circumstances. So I don't see any reason to change it to 2 to 4. I think that if we're going to continue our process of working on norms and protocols, getting a greater understanding of how our processes are going to work, You may recall one of the things that we've had out there as an action item is this, the board manual or whatever that I still don't think we need, but it's something that we've had out there as part of our norms and protocols. So to me, at this time, when it was first walked on, I took it as a response to the fact that some of us had called a special meeting. So I just think that if our real challenge is communication and working more collaboratively as a board, then that should be our focus. I don't think we should change the policy at this time if, just for the sake of changing the policy. I mean, that's just my take on it.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think changing this policy is an attempt to silence the minority, and it shouldn't be used that way.
And Madam Chair, in response to that, it's not an attempt to silence the minority. It's an attempt to allow a governance team to work together and not to allow the minority to misabuse a policy that we have in place. We've had 2 special call meetings that 2 individuals have called, which, to be perfectly honest, could have been handled in a regular scheduled meeting. And so the attempt here is to ensure that we use the processes that we have in place. One is to go through the chair. That's where everything should really start. That's why it's listed in the policy and why it's in the state code that you go through the chair and that they leave it up to the local school board to determine the number of individuals outside of that. And the reason why I say 4 people, because in its essence, again, it is overruling the will of the chair to determine our agenda and determine the direction for which we've gone. And I know, Mr. Jordan, you can look at that. You've been chairman for a number of years and determining what the agenda would be. So again, I place this back here for an up or down vote from the board, whether or not we move from 2 to 4. I believe that 4 individuals is a super will to overrule the right of the majority, the majority in the respect of the board chair, to be able to determine what's on the agenda and not to consistently have special call meetings to handle things that should be handled in regular meeting. They are not emergencies. And I think that we should really use it for emergencies and that we talk as a board when we determine something's an emergency.
Yeah. So, if I may, again, I don't disagree with that at all. I think that, as was mentioned, I think we called 2 special meetings, or 2 special meetings have been called. One was to try to deal with the norms and protocols and what the process was. And as we know, we're still working on that. The second item came up in response to a specific issue that we were trying to get on the agenda or to have for discussion, and we couldn't get that there. So I agree with you about working through the chair. There's no intent to circumvent the role of the chair. I think the role of the chair works 2 ways. There's the individual school board members that try to work through the chair, but it's also incumbent upon the chair to make sure that there's a open opportunity for communication and there's a process that is clearly understood by the board as a whole, including the superintendent, on how things get on the agenda. And I think it is fair to say that we are working through that as a board. So my suggestion is that let us continue to work through that process. I understand at some point before this meeting is over, we will know when we're going to continue to work through those norms and protocols and get clarity on that process. And I would say once we get through that process, if it needs to come back for reconsideration, then do it there. But that's just my opinion.
Again, this is not a normal protocol. This is policy. And so even when we get to the handbook that you talk about, which is protocol, how we do that, this is looking at a policy for which state code has codified for us and told us exactly how we do this and left it up to the local school board to determine the number of individuals. I think 2 or more is too low of a number to overrule with the chair, because to me it just means that you don't have to go to the chair, and anytime you don't get anything you want, you just call a special call meeting. And so, again, I'm asking for a simple up or down vote on it, and whether or not it's gone to the committee, I oblige that, and if not, I'll call it up.
Can I ask a question just for clarity? Because you mentioned the overruling the will of the chair. Is that the correct language?
When I say this, in other words, it's just ignoring even going to the chair, whether or not we're adding something. Because you talked about the last special call meeting. We had 2 separate conversations about that topic. And to be perfectly honest, when I think we all see exactly why that special call meeting was called when we look at the pilot's article that came out. So I'm in a position of saying that I want to avoid unnecessary meetings that, to be perfectly honest, are being used, weaponized for other things, and that we should allow the majority and the will of the board, meaning that people got to talk. And it may not also be, the same people all the time, and we've seen where it's not always the same folks. But we got to determine whether or not it's something that's truly a special call meeting for an emergency, or if it's something that we can put into the regular agenda. That's where I'm at.
I just like to say that being a part of one who called the last meeting, there was no intent on my part to weaponize. We explained in the memo while we were calling for the meeting. Circumstances dictated. We tried to, I think, follow appropriate processes in order to do that. The only reason why I keep bringing up the norms and protocols piece is because as I understood, part of the rationale was how do we go about the process of getting things on the agenda? That has been something that we talk about in terms of our norms and protocols, and that's why I was speaking to norms and protocols. I don't disagree with you in terms of we're talking about policy, but I thought your rationale was that you didn't feel that we were effectively following the norms and protocol process in terms of working through the chair in order to get an item on the agenda. That's
clearly stated policy.
I'm just telling you
policy.
what my interpretation was of what
I'm
of your
clarifying the
rationale.
interpretation. It's policy. Okay.
So I would say that I appreciate that Mr. Clanton has allowed this recommendation to go to the policy committee. The policy committee wanted to get more information as to his rationale. If it wants to be brought forward and put as a discussion item at our December meeting, I'm happy to have it brought forth as a discussion item. I think that what this really boils down to, if I had my little elephant, is it comes down to trust. Do we trust each other enough to say that we are willing to communicate candidly, and to communicate also not just with the chair, but also with who we have as our superintendent? What it is of the desire of the board, and then again, what is your motive, and what are the outcomes that you're looking to get? Because I can say that while there are individuals who thought that they were perfectly in alignment with feeling it necessary to call a special meeting, others of us felt that it was not necessary. And there are other things that went along with that as well that I will not get into right now. But I think that having 2 special call meetings relatively close to each other in a time frame has initiated this discussion. But again, it all comes back down to trust and how we want to treat each other. And that has been an ongoing conversation with our governance training, and we absolutely did put forth very good effort, I thought, with the Virginia School Board Association to talk about our norms and protocols. And we do have a plan in place right now for putting items on the agenda. And we are trying to follow that to the letter. In fact, even when Ms. Tanner was developing the agenda, even over the holiday break, we forgot to add the future agenda items topic to this agenda. And I said, oh, Ms. Tanner, we need to make sure we do this because this is what we all agreed to at our meeting. So the intention is there to work collaboratively. The intention is there to build trust. We need to demonstrate that through our actions. And that's on us. So is there the opinion of the board right now to put this item as a up or down vote on the business meeting? Mr. Clinton, I'm going to leave this to you. Would you like for that to be your desire? Is that your request at this point?
I mean, I like for an up or down vote, and anybody who's seen me, if it's a no, I'm going to go with the will of the board, and I'm not going to be upset about it. But
So what we need, though, is an actual draft of what how the policy, if there's a change, what that would be.
It's still in board docs.
Okay,
It's
so
still there.
you want
I'll
to
send
save
it to
those
you.
changes?
Yep.
Okay.
So I would support that as a discussion item at our business meeting in December then.
Just for clarity, discussion item or decision item?
Well, usually at our business meeting after it's a discussion decision item. It would be a voting item.
Okay.
Outside of the consent agenda.
All right, so right now, we don't, the policy committee doesn't have a recommendation, but what we are doing is putting it on the business meeting agenda for a vote. Is that what I'm understanding?
We talked about it. We wanted to open it up to him, but if he already has the draft, do we want to review it? I mean, I don't know.
Well, it sounds like if it's under discussion decision, it's an opportunity, if it's posted before, the required, if it's posted at the required time before the meeting, it gives board members the opportunity to review the draft. I don't think there's it sounds like there is an additional research to do regarding the policy itself. I did look and see what other boards were doing in the time that it was raised before to now, and we are currently in alignment with what a lot of boards are doing. So, hearing the sentiments of some of my.
But you do also acknowledge that there are some boards that have 4 or more.
There are
Thank
some,
you.
or that say that a majority of the board has to.
Thank
So
you.
I think
wanna make
there
sure
was
that's clearly stated.
one of those. And I said there are, but there are also more so that are in line with ours. And we, something to consider is that if there are more than 2 board members at any meeting, it's a public meeting. So keep that in mind as well. So that's, if 3 board members want to get together to talk about an issue because communication has been blocked or restricted in some way, in some fashion, which, yes, I agree, it is about trust, and we don't have that trust, and, that's as you said, the elephant. And I believe, for me, this, putting this policy further deepens the distrust, because that is, I think you've articulated the motive behind wanting to change it in my eyes, and so that deepens distrust in my board leadership. And we are all equal parties up here. The board chair has no greater authority than any one of us sitting around this table.
But our policy states that the board chair can call a special call meeting.
If the board chair can, and 2 or more members that are not the chair can also call.
Just dependent upon the local board, which is what the state code gives us the authority to do.
But our
which is what I'm
policy-
putting forth. So if the committee doesn't want to move with the 4, and that's not your recommendation, that's fine. But as a member of this board, I can bring any motion forward. And so I'm asking for this to be placed on a discussion item.
Can we put it back to committee? Because I think what we can do is we can present several options. So it would then be discussed at January's work session for vote in January.
You're asking me to send this back to committee?
Well, we weren't really able to spend too much time on it at this last meeting, and we wanted you to present so we really wanted your direction and to discuss this as a board on why you wanted us to look at it. And then, so anyways, either way, I think that there's a couple of options here on what we could do in December. At our December 18th meeting, we could discuss it further if you'd like some options, or if you wanted to just go ahead and put that on the agenda, either way.
It also allows us to see it in the normal format, if all you're saying is to change the 2 to 3.
Let me
but
clarify,
it
the
lets
normal
us see-
format was posted, and it's there on board docs in the clean version, red line version, and the current policy. So
Okay.
I don't know what outside additional version we would need.
Okay, well, which meeting was that? Which
The-
meeting was that?
Put it on the December.
At the last
Right,
meeting?
but the agreement was, when we discussed it, because it came up I think it was at the last business meeting, it was placed on board docs. We saw it.
Yeah.
We asked questions about it, and I thought the agreement coming out of that meeting was we were sending it to the policy committee to work on it.
For it to be
The po-
brought back in December.
Let me finish. It's still December. As I understand it, the policy committee stated that they wanted to provide an opportunity for us to be able to speak to it.
Okay.
And then they would go back and work on it. So I'm not sure what the,
Like I
what's wrong with
said
that?
at the beginning of this presentation, we had a very short time to spend on our policies. We did briefly discuss it, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to share that as a board and have this discussion, so we can have more clarification. And so, I don't see anything out of line with that.
So then, why don't we, now that you have heard the sentiment of some of the board members, take it back and bring back a recommendation for discussion at the January work session.
Thank you.
Okay, the next policy, public participation at the board meetings and public hearings.
Okay. So, earlier this year, there were changes made we moved from, and it was explained as a pilot, am I correct?
Correct,
From
it's a pilot.
having one public comment session during our business meetings to separating it out to having the agenda items commented on for 3-minute time limit, and then after the vote, the consent agenda was voted on, then having non-agenda items, 3 minutes dedicated to non-agenda items for public hearing. We never updated the policy either way, so it still states that the one-time 3-minute allotment for any topic. So at this time, we did discuss this at policy, and we are split between evenly split between continuing with the pilot and going back with the old way of just one time. And so we don't have a recommendation. We didn't come to terms on that. So we wanted to bring that to discussion today.
Okay.
So can I ask the question, did you all look at the policy recommendation that I put forth?
Yeah, I did.
For this one?
This is,
Comment.
oh, no, I didn't look at this.
Oh.
I didn't see this one.
Just
Where
a question.
did
Was it
you-
changed?
Where did you submit that?
Okay. This was submitted because it was going to be discussed for action at the last meeting. It is still sitting on board docs. I'm looking at it right now. So I have a recommendation coming from the policy committee when the policy committee hasn't looked at my policy.
I see
recommendation.
the policy that's posted right now on board docs doesn't have any changes to it.
I'm looking at a clean red line and a,
Are you on today's meeting or you on a different
no,
meeting?
I'm not.
Oh, I'm looking at
It's on your
today's
previous
meeting.
No, it was at our last it was at our last combined work session and business
So we don't
meeting.
waste any time on it. Can we just make sure that the policy committee actually has the copy of the policy recommendation so you guys can look at it?
Well, I
and then you
think-
can make
Right,
a
well,
recommendation
there weren't
based
any
on it.
policies posted for our policy committee meeting, but
The ultimate is, do we want to go back to the previous one session of one allotted time for public comment, or do we want to stay with the pilot, which would be 2? If
But
you
I-
at least give us that direction.
I mean, but I submitted back 2 policy recommendations, so I would really like for the policy committee to look at the recommendations because I clarified several things, not just about when you come to the board meeting, but also public comment on our public hearings. There's a much more detailed recommendation to try to clean up a lot of different things that we acknowledged. So I don't think that we can do that in this work session, so only thing I would like to do is to send it back to the policy committee and for you all to actually look at the policy recommendations
So
that I
it'll go
submitted back in
December
November.
20th to the
Yeah.
policy committee, then for discussion on January
Yep,
8th.
that's fine.
But I do have a,
But
Dr.
Karen-
Gabriel.
Karen, could you make sure that we have copies of the version that he's talking about for our policy?
or just post it under the
committee.
Mr. Jordan?
So I just had a question, because I'm, just in light of the previous conversation, so we're describing the change that we have now as a pilot. So can you just describe what the process is for us to pilot policy changes like that? Because I didn't know it was considered a pilot. It just, one day, it was on the agenda as a change, and then I remember when I first saw it, I thought it was a mistake. And then I asked about it, and then the next thing I know, we've just been implementing it. So the reason why I had some questions about it is because I didn't know what the rationale was behind the change. It wasn't like we discussed it as a team in terms of the pilot. So, just in terms of moving forward.
Okay. All right.
What's wrong?
No, I'm just going to address your question when you finish.
Okay, because then I thought you were saying that we came with an idea for a pilot came up. We implemented the pilot, and then the policy changes that you're recommending, is that codifying the pilot? I'm just trying to understand the process.
So, Mr. Jordan, as you know, the state president now, that you control your agenda.
What is
You control your agenda. The chair, the president, controls setting the agenda. And so when you look at setting your agenda in the format, the chair moved forward with changing a format to better keep the business meeting moving forward. You brought up several times that we have a policy in there that this might be in conflict. And so based on the recommendations that you had stated, we're bringing to make sure that these things are following up and catching up to the policy that we have here. So policy, procedure, practice. So this is what this recommendation is to do just that, to catch us up and to change the policy to reflect now what we have and what we're moving forward in the agenda.
And I don't think that changing the agenda to separating out public comment to agenda and non-agenda items is directly tied to policy. I think what we were trying to do was to align the policy so that members could speak more than once, so that if they did have an agenda topic to speak to and a non-agenda topic to speak to, that they were able to do so and that we were in alignment with policy. I mean, we have several examples in the past. I mean, just look at the PE policy. We have a policy in place and we were not necessarily following what that policy was. I mean, it is what it is. So what the concern was that was brought up, which we were totally fine with, was, hey, we need to make sure that our policy aligns with this pilot that we're doing. And the premises for the pilot was to better get through the business and to intake the public comment as it directly relates to voting items so that we could make those decisions and then move on. And then the non-voting items we hear, we're not limiting any community members or stakeholders' input. It just means that they wait till the end of the meeting once the voting items have been discussed. That's all. So
a couple of things. One, I would just like to respectfully request, I am appreciative of the fact that I'm current president of the Virginia School Board Association, but it really has no bearing whatsoever on the work that we're doing here. So I would just ask if my role there is not constantly brought up in part of these discussions. The second thing is I don't have any objection. You know, I guess the phraseology of the chair or the president controlling the agenda. All I'm asking is what our process had been previously. We would discuss things like this as a board. We would do it at a work session like we're doing now. If it was the will of the board and working with the superintendent to do a pilot or do something like that, it would be something we would discuss. It wouldn't necessarily be something that would show up and then we would discuss it after the fact. So that's where I was trying to get some clarity on what the rationale was. The other thing I think we should consider as part of that process is, and I shared with you all some time ago, just looking at what some other districts has done. I think if we're going to go down the path of bifurcating, which I'm fine, because I know we had discussed about possibly doing that some years back, our notification process and our process for placing things on board docs by a particular date becomes more heightened.
it does.
Because now if a citizen wants to be able to comment on an agenda item, we have then a greater responsibility in making sure that that agenda item is available for them in some period of time so that they are aware of what it is that we're going to discuss. So I think we have to, as part of the committee and part of the board, we need to think through those deadlines and timelines. The other thing that I've just noticed during this pilot phase is I think there's also a public education process that needs to go on. Because right now, it hasn't been consistent. You know, I think there's still some confusion with the public in terms of that process. So what some of the governance manuals or best practices recommend is if you're going to have a significant change in a policy like that, that you take your time in doing it. Maybe 2 reads of the policy, maybe opportunity for public input, but it's something that, since it involves engaging the public and changing practices that have been so long entrenched just in terms of practice and culture, I don't have any objection to us bifurcating it. I just think that if we're going to do that, that we should make sure that we are deliberate in what we're doing and that we're communicating to the public, and so folks have a good understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Even the policy as is not aligned in the practice that we're using anyway. I mean, so it still needs to be updated.
Right. So then the recommendation is going to be that the policy committee take a look at it, make sure that it is aligned with the practice that we have. I don't disagree with what Mr. Jordan has just stated. We, of course, want to make sure that we have processes in place that take into consideration considerate feedback, stakeholder input, all of that. And so moving forward, if you all could take a look at it and bring forth a recommendation, then that's what we need. And we just need to keep moving the ball forward. Ms. Basine?
So back to the foundational question, though. We are all in agreement that we're bifurcating that, right? Before we change the policy.
Well, that's where I was saying we were split. Yeah. Between the two of us, we are split.
Right. That's not the question at hand for the policy committee. The question at hand for the policy committee is align the policy with what we currently are doing right now.
So bifurcated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean,
just being clear on that.
Okay.
I mean, that is what it is right now.
It's review the policy that I sent you.
Well, I see that, and I apologize. I did see it. I see it on board
That's
docs.
what we did in a vote last month.
But that was not transferred over to our policy committee, so,
But, I mean,
which is why it was not
that.
reviewed. But as I said, the question is, the discussion around, which requires the full board to participate in it, is, are we splitting up the agenda item, the public comment period? So we need, before we change it, are we splitting it? And if so, then yes, as Ms. Martin stated, our current policy is not in alignment with that practice. So I think that's where we have to.
So let me do this, so that way we can move on to the next item. I don't think we need to beat this dead horse. What I'd like for the policy committee to do is to look at the recommendations brought forth by Mr. Clanton. When we come back in January, that will be a full 6 months or so that we have done this. I agree that there's an educational piece to the rollout. Again, we have lots of folks in transition learning roles and trying to educate individuals. So I understand the question that it looks like we need to have as a board. Do we want to continue to do things this way, or do we not? We don't have the time to have that discussion at this point in time, but I hear that is where the concern is from the policy committee. So I think that at the very least, look at the recommendations proposed by Mr. Clanton, and at the next policy session, we can have that discussion. It'll be January, it'll be 6 months into it. We can see what has worked well, what hasn't worked well. And if we need to take it to the public for input, then we can do it at that point in time. But I think that is the most logical process with the time constraint that we have right now that we can do in order to just keep our agenda moving forward. Does that sound fair to everyone?
Okay.
Okay. So is that the last? No,
No,
update.
we have recess.
Update, okay.
We don't have any new updates on recess. Okay, do you have one? Okay, because we didn't talk about it at the policy committee meeting.
Okay.
Doctor.
But you're prepared, Dr. Cataldo.
Pardon?
So I said, but you're prepared, so go for it.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Someone.
So we have 4 schools that are actually piloting the recess changes. started on Monday. So, and I already received a parent phone call that was very happy about some of the
Okay.
on. So right now we're piloting at Jaycox, Mary Calcott, PB Young, and Larchmont. And so we tried to pick schools very different in different parts of the city. We also sent letters home to parents, letting them know about the pilot and what we're doing. We are starting, as I said, on Monday. We're going to be finishing up probably mid to late January, so we have enough time. And then at that time, we're going to survey teachers about what they have seen with student engagement, survey principals to see what they've seen as far as disciplinary notices, if they've seen maybe possibly a reduction in those, and then also give an opportunity for parents to provide input as well as if they've noticed any changes or so going on from there. So we're very excited to be starting that pilot, and so I'll have more information come forth as we get additional information and as we move through the pilot.
Is this 20 minutes in the afternoon and 20 minutes in the morning?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Question. Could you provide for the board, I guess I'm supposed to be going through channels to ask for something, but because it's this particular item, are you piloting it in the primary K2 grades, or are you piloting it in the entire K, except for Young, the entire elementary K to 5?
At this time, when we spoke with the schools, we left it up to them to kind of look at what would really work within their schedules. We didn't want it to be too disruptive to students, and we didn't want too many major changes since we were doing this at a later time.
And could we hear about the impact on master scheduling?
Yes.
And also, could we have a list by grade level of the minutes that are required for each subject area? Added to that, the minutes that are required for resource every day, the minutes that are required for lunch. Added into that, the movement time. So, for example, if you've got 45 minutes for resource every day, 5 minutes there, 5 minutes back at least, that's 10 more minutes that are added. And so are there enough minutes in the day? And then does double recess, 20 minutes, which means it's 30 minutes, with movement back and forth and the stopping to get water and going to the bathroom. I can tell you it's going to be 30 minutes each way. Do all those minutes fit in the day? And if they don't, where are we taking away? Are we taking away from the math block and beyond the fact of how many minutes the State Department has put in, have schools made a decision to grab any extra minutes that they have to give more math support or more reading support, and are they losing those extra minutes that they've managed to snatch from here and there to make sure they have a full 2-hour reading block and a full 1-hour math block? What's happening with that? Are we still getting in 30 minutes of science and 30 minutes of social studies every day? In other words, what's the impact on instruction, especially in our non-accredited schools? Recess is great. I'm not arguing against recess, but if I'm a non-accredited school and I'm losing minutes in math, I've got a concern.
I think that as this is a policy that is going to be coming forth to the board, and as they're working through it, I think that as a board member, any information that you need in order to make an informed decision is perfectly appropriate.
Thank you.
So I would support that.
Yeah, that's why we're doing the pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea that you're doing a pilot, because as someone who's done a lot of master scheduling, and you got to get those minutes in, and then if you need more time for a particular subject area, you know, we all blew the social studies DBA, so we need to do something there where we grab in those minutes, you know, and once you put recess in, it's there for every school the same, and that's something that's guarded. You know, we really do. I really do. Principals try and make sure that time's protected. Even if it's pouring outside, they make sure you have inside. So once that's mandated, then really and truly you've lost a big chunk of time. And some schools, you know, it's a different point of view depending on your school, what you want to give up. Okay. Well, I didn't say anything during any of the others.
No. Yep. No,
But this is one I have a concern about for 3 to 5. I'm going to keep talking if I want to.
Yeah, well,
Campson.
6:30 we adjourn.
Yeah,
so.
we're
This
trying
is
to
why I'm
stay on
sitting next to
schedule.
him. You're gonna
Okay.
put a
Ms.
gag
Basine,
on my mouth.
Okay, remember,
haven't
we're
said
trying to
any-
end at 6:30, so.
I
Ms.
didn't talk
Tanner
nearly
has
as much
still
as
has
you
a few
talked about
things
yours.
to share
And
with
I sat
us.
right here through them.
Dr. Cataldo, could you Could you provide,
I want to say something.
I mean, you mentioned a couple of things that you're going to be looking for as part of this pilot. Could you clearly indicate to us in some way, you know, whether you write it up, but what the indicators will be that you're looking for? I mean, I heard
Yeah.
you're going to survey teachers,
Yeah, we're gonna
which
survey
I
teachers,
assume was
parents,
around
and admin.
scheduling perhaps, but if you could.
Student
more-
engagement.
Yeah, if you could, you know, kind of spell that out. You know, I heard discipline, I heard a couple other things, but if you could just say what indicators we can look forward to when you bring the results back to us.
I would say if there are indicators that you all find that are important for us to gather, it'd be a great time for us to be doing that and getting that information from you all as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just trying
Since
to
we're
get
not
us.
really we're gonna wait till like the end, so we know what data we have now. We're gonna
Right.
wait till the end and kind of get that information from folks.
Right. And then.
Hold on,
I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Smith. Mr. Jordan had a question.
Oh, well, I was gonna-
Okay.
Go ahead. No? Huh?
All right, Mr. Jordan.
All
go.
right, well, just go ahead.
Well, one of the things, and I think you said, I can't quite remember, that I would be interested in, and it's something also I'd like as a future topic, is the impact, or if there is some correlation that we'll find between this and behavior, one way or the other.
Yeah.
The research right now says that it does correlate.
Does.
And it does say that student engagement increases, which we know that if we have student engagement increasing, we get back those minutes
And so
that we lose in the.
what I'm getting at, yes, that's what the data says. So in addition to us just piloting, implementing policies, we need, as a board, to be able to understand and see, and the community needs to be able to understand and see how the different decisions we make improve our district. So that's why I'm asking this question. So ultimately, the board should have some type of report at some point that says
Yeah,
to
you all
us,
voted on it,
here
yeah.
is the return on investment from implementing this policy. That's what I'm saying.
What I'm hearing from Ms. Campson and from you is that we need impact studies. We need to know how it impacts minutes.
Exactly.
We need to impact how it affects master scheduling. We need to know how it impacts behavior, how it impacts
anything.
the items.
And I'm not sure a month is going to give you the level of
Well,
data.
no,
That's
no,
just
what I was
especially a
gonna
month.
get
if
to.
we're
I think
trying to
that's
look
your
at something-
expertise.
Yeah, especially with the
I don't think
holidays.
so.
and the
You're right,
I don't-
exactly.
Yeah,
Extended.
I don't think that this
Yeah, or
is,
anything.
this is a
Gotta have a
topic,
trend.
End of the year.
this is a topic
what I
of
was-
concern that was brought
Gonna
forth to
spit
the
out.
board
Okay.
by community members. There is data behind it.
Unless it's
I
not a
think that
trend.
we are trying to be responsive to our stakeholders, but I think we are also trying to be methodical about how it is implemented. This is not something that you can just turn the light switch on or off and say, this is how we're going to do it. I think that it is very important that we see how it impacts. And so I know that this process has been long. I know for me it feels like it's taking forever, but I also understand that it impacts and affects many individuals. But what we do need, though, is even though I know it won't take a month or 2 months, we do need to be able to understand when we can expect information to be brought back to us, because that will impact agenda planning and how we look at policy and whatnot. So I think it was
And again,
Madam
I would state for the record that we're going to need more than a month
I
to get some
agree.
solid data.
I think
That
the
makes
policy
sense.
should
If
run
we're going to
longer.
make data-informed decisions, then we
So-
need more than a couple of weeks to look at all
Right.
of these different areas.
I'd give it till the end of the year.
I
for
would
the
too. I
pilot.
was
I'd go-
thinking
I'd run the pilot to the
definitely
end of the
May.
year.
Come back and tell us in January what you think that is
I call
going
for
to
the
maybe
order of the
another
day.
outline,
It is 6:30,
timeline.
and our agenda states that we adjourn.
Yes, sir.
So unless we're moving to add additional time, we're at adjournment.
I would like to add additional time and complete the future agenda items.
Not gonna be here.
I second that.
So, let's take 5 minutes.
The question.
I just,
Okay,
if I'm allowed,
1 minute. 1 minute, please.
so
One, they got cut off.
this process piece is part of what I keep speaking to. So I just want the board to understand, I have no idea what you all are talking about. I don't know what the pilot is. I've seen some discussions because I had the opportunity to sit in on one policy committee meeting where some of this was being discussed. But process-wise, this recess piece wasn't on the agenda
Right.
yesterday.
It was.
Okay?
We're
It's
just
on-
finding out about this.
That's what I'm saying. It's on the,
And we're
it's-
on the committee.
okay. It's on the agenda now.
Yeah.
And we have heard some presentation, there's no written anything about doing a pilot, and I'm not clear if it's being driven by board policy, is it being driven by administration recommendation, is it being driven by community advocacy? The process is important in having some structure by which these presentations come forward and these pilots get implemented, because we have to be very careful, because we have constituents who advocate for many things.
That's right.
And so if we're going to adopt some process, which I'm all for, because I'm all for experimentation, but if we need to be clear about our process, otherwise we open ourselves up to one constituent group that is advocating for one thing, saying, well, you won't give us an opportunity to pilot something. And then another group says that we were allowed. So I just think in terms of a best practice, administration should come forward with a recommendation, share it with the board if they're asking for board, if it requires board approval. And so we are clear on what it is that we're doing for how long. I mean, we should not be in a work session having conversations at this point around how long do we do it, what the data is, and so forth. I appreciate the things that Ms. Campson brought forward, because there are things I would not have considered. And that's the advantage of having presentations come forward, be a part of a work session, and then being driven from there versus implement it and pilot it first and then come back and try to backfill
Madam
it.
Chair,
I agree.
July, in all fairness to the administration, I put a motion forth in July because I got tired of hearing about this topic and there was nothing happening. And I asked in that motion to have something come back to us in December. So in all fairness to the administration, if they're updating us that this is what they're doing right now to bring us back information, the
I'm not
motion
trying
was
to
made
be
in
unfair
July
to
and
the
we voted to send it to committee for this to happen and to come now.
What I'm saying is, if you look at, I know some of us have been looking at some of the different policy recommendations. There are things in there around how reports are brought to the board for discussion. All I'm saying is that I don't think a verbal report over something like this is good practice for us. It's not I'm not being critical of the administration. I'm just saying collectively, if we're going to do something like this, let's follow the format that we typically follow and have a presentation and have these things addressed so that we can all be informed and be on the same page and have a viable discussion. So that's all.
The last time that we talked about pilot at all was in that meeting, that policy meeting that you were in. And it was discussed as an option. And then the discussion led to, well, how can we do this with fidelity because every school is structured so differently?
Right.
And really learn anything from it, right? So apparently the administration took that initiative and implemented it. I would have liked to have known beforehand. I appreciate the movement on it, but I would have liked to have known.
Before we can make a recommendation to you all, we need to have information. And we had no information at all on how this would affect anybody.
Right, okay.
So we talked with principals, they were very concerned. And so we went before them and we said, the board would like us at some point to review this and possibly have a policy change. Well, I said, we don't have any information. We have no idea how it would impact all the things that Ms. Campson said. So that's all we're doing right now. We're just gathering information. We have pilots all the time in many different areas. As we gather this information, we will bring it before the Policy Review Committee, make that recommendation, and then have you all decide what you want to do. I mean, that's what I thought the process was.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I do appreciate that. So then it's still in policy. You all are still working through the details. We absolutely look to the administrative recommendations for it. I appreciate the update. I think that it's important for, any stakeholder, and as Mr. Jordan mentions, processes and whatnot, that they know that we are having it as a discussion item, whether we talk about it in a session or whether or not it's talked about in policy committee. So I thank you for this, is there anything else policy-wise that we need to be aware of? Okay, so then let's move on to future agenda items. I'm gonna let Ms. Tanner go first and get out of the way the governance training items that she needed to bring forth to the board.
Yes, in lieu of continuous doodle polls and emails back and forth, I spoke with VSBA. I know we have the VSBA makeup training that we needed to do for the sessions that you all weren't there that particular Saturday. So I had two options after speaking to them on the session 3. Full day sessions for January 16th from 8:30 to 3:30, and then have January 17th from 8:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., and that will allow you to make up for that Saturday session. Or option, which I would suggest, but of course is your idea, what you like to do, or option 2, the dates that they're able to come to Norfolk in December for a 3 to 5 p.m. session would be December 9th, 17th, or 19th. And then also, too, you have the location for the meeting could either be in Norfolk or Richmond, but, financially would be.
Did you say the 16th and the 17th?
No.
Thursday
I
and
said
Friday?
December 19th, 17th.
No, not December. The January ones?
Okay, it's January 16th and 17th.
16 and 17.
Uh-huh.
That's our current, what we
That's
already
what we
have.
currently already
Right.
have.
Right.
You'll just be extending your January 17th.
Yeah, I mean, I
meeting.
have it, it was already on our calendar. I thought for some reason someone said Saturday, so it's Thursday and Friday.
Right, and you'll just be extending your half-day to
Full day.
2:30
Yeah,
p.m.
that makes sense to me.
And they're
Rather than
willing to
doing a
come
whole
here
new
to
day.
Norfolk.
We're already there.
So, because, Madam Chair, because I've got to excuse myself and my colleagues, I'm going to go for the January one, because I think since we already have it, if we can add it
A
on,
lot of December stuff coming up.
it'll be better use of our time, because if we start looking at the other ones, it might just get convoluted with a lot of stuff that we have to do. And I'm also making the recommendation that we have it here.
Yes.
And they say they're willing to come here that day.
January?
January, January 16th and 17th.
So our options are, for the makeup training, that we just tag it on to January 16th and 17th training, which is already scheduled. Or the other option is, you said December 9th,
17th or the 19th.
Or the
Or the 19th,
19th, okay.
from 3 to 5.
From 3 to 5. Okay.
I'd like to just do January.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can't do
January.
anything more in December.
Nothing
So
else in December.
Mr. Clant has already said January. Ms. Martin, January? Ms. Campson?
Yeah, we already had those dates on our calendar, January.
I'm fine to do it in January, too.
Yes,
I think one of
January
those
would be
dates
better.
actually conflicts with our superintendent. Mr.
Yeah,
Jordan?
one of the December dates does, but January doesn't.
Okay. Mr. Jordan?
What are you asking me?
I-
I mean, I think the December dates are too late to even be considering.
That's how I feel.
So
Yeah.
it seems to me the only thing we're discussing is where. Is that correct?
Where?
Charlottesville or Norfolk?
Yeah, is that what is?
For
So it looks like we're talking about
January.
January 16th and 17th, and the
Yes.
question is, where do we do it?
Well,
no.
are you okay with us doing it, piggybacking the?
Well, at this
the
point, I don't
extra-
think we have any choice. I mean, I just think time-wise,
I don't think we do either.
right, so,
Already there,
right, so,
yeah, that
but I
day.
would
already blocked off
recommend
our calendars.
Charlottesville for the
Consensus on
location.
January. I just
Huh?
want to make sure we all have consensus on January. And I want Ms. Tanner to make note of that. We have consensus for January. And then where we have the training, Norfolk or Charlottesville.
I think we should do it in Charlottesville.
Me too.
Charlottesville,
Charlottesville.
Charlottesville. Ms. Smith?
Charlottesville,
Charlottesville?
that's
Okay.
what you were asking.
Norfolk?
Norfolk.
Norfolk. Norfolk?
Yeah, I do, because
Plus, it's cheaper
travel.
for the two of them to travel than for all of us to travel.
Not that I don't love going to
It's a lot of
Norfolk, to
rooms.
Charlottesville, but I just.
But Norfolk.
Yeah,
Okay.
I prefer Norfolk.
Okay, so the consensus is that January
Not consensus.
16th and 17th, and the training will be in Norfolk.
Yes.
Okay, done. Future agenda items?
Could I say something really quick? We've been here since 9. Why can't we just send you an email with our future agenda items? It's been a long day.
I don't want a wish list, though. Okay, I don't mind. If y'all want to defer and send it through email, we have agenda planning on December the 9th. But again, this topic on the agenda is not to be an exhaustive measure. It's just, real quick
Well,
quick
all right.
things.
I've
So-
just set my
I
timer.
can't think of anything right now, so I will.
I can.
Okay.
I don't have anything.
Okay, Ms. Basine?
Well, it's not so much an additional, so last time we did this, and I know I have either sent or given a list of things to, can we somehow put in place some method so that the full board can see when topics are gonna be discussed? So we talked about the board calendar, so I would like to suggest that we set a date for when we're gonna have this board calendar ready for the full board to see when exactly we're gonna be discussing these topics, because right now it's kind of like, a guessing game about what we're talking about at the next meeting.
With the way that the schedule was, the agenda planning fell outside of the combined meeting date and outside of this date, so I think that is the intention of us, to make sure that with the agenda items that are brought forth, that the calendar, that we have the placeholders in for items that either are for consideration, or if we say, thanks for that recommendation, it's gonna be in the parking lot for right now, and then we can revisit it at X time.
Okay, but as a priority item, as we start to, we're really in January, is that we need to have some information about what our communication plan is as we are working toward changing the start times, because families are gonna wanna know what is, the definitive, we have the times, but, what we're doing, I think we need to have that plan ready to go.
And if the board recalls, I did request that a while ago, that we have a standing list, if you will, on the agenda, and as it comes off, we know that we're now discussing issues, and that we don't have to go look through months, and a calendar work as well, that we don't have to go look through months of information to figure out when something was put on there, but it should be provided to us, those issues that we bring up, and when they're finally taken for presentation. Now with the future agenda items, Dr. Bergson, one of the things I'm interested in is suspensions. And we do have that state data. I've seen that, but I'd like for us to get a presentation, and you can decide how it's done, whether it's 2x2's work session, but just talking about and presenting to us, we know it's an issue. The majority of it is associated with behavioral problems. What alternatives can we as a district implement that would, alternatives to suspension or add-ons to whatever we're doing, that will mitigate the behavior problems that are associated with it? I don't know if mediation is an option, but something that ultimately corrects the behavior issues that we're identifying, so that the students will operate cohesively within the classroom?
So, Ms. Smith, what we want to do for this area is we want to provide a very broad topic.
Okay,
and
suspensions.
And then we have to see if it's already embedded.
Discipline, okay.
If we have to see if it's already embedded in the accountability plan, so if there's already going to be a presentation, which there is.
It's in there.
There is. And then, so I don't think that we necessarily have to have board consensus on it, because it's already in the accountability plan.
So change it to discipline, because that's a broader topic. That was something Ms. Basine said.
Yeah, because I'd like to see that.
I understand what you're saying, Dr. Gabriel. But I will say this. Topics that assist us with making informed decisions regarding our district, and especially from a policy perspective, are far few and in between with this team that we have. And again, as Mr. Jordan said earlier, trying to get specific topics on the agenda so that we can begin to have those types of discussions. It's a mystery how to do it. We keep saying it's a part of the accountability plan and we're gonna have that discussion, but at what point do we actually have these discussions that is going to move the needle that we talk about forward?
I appreciate your comments, Ms. Smith, and respectfully, our agendas are packed with lots of information. We try to give as much focus as we can to student outcomes and the academic achievement, and I appreciate what you have to say. Thank you. I call this meeting adjourned.